A Japanese man has just finished a game that took him 3 years to complete, but that is far from what he truly wanted. According to him, the game is far too weak. He wishes he could find one that would last 10 years. Searching for that, he comes across an online game that claims to never end, an endless adventure filled with magic and fantasy. Looking at the available difficulty options, he notices one called Hell Mode, whose description reads, "Regret is the least of your worries, for what you are about to face is the true meaning of despair." Intrigued by the dramatic line, the player chooses that difficulty and then faces the class selection screen. Among the usual classes, such as Swordsman, he is fascinated by Demon Lord, but becomes curious about how difficult the Conjurer seems to be, since it automatically places the player in the social class of Servant and is still in a testing phase. Motivated by a worthy challenge, the moment he clicks to start the game, the Japanese man is pulled into the screen. Sometime later, he wakes up with a younger voice around him, in an environment similar to a womb. In fact, after pushing his way out, he is born again into a place with a medieval atmosphere. After his father picks up the baby, sees that he is a boy, he decides his name will be Alan. Next, we see information explaining that the difficulty Alan chose requires 100 times more XP to level up compared to normal difficulty, but has no level limit. By overcoming despair, we will come to understand the beginning of this world. As time goes by, Alan grows up in a humble home filled with love and attention from his parents. He used to be a 35-year-old Japanese man broke, without a degree, and bad with women named Kanishi Yamada. Now, even though he is a 1-year-old baby and cannot speak, he is able to easily understand the words he hears, mainly because, by luck, Japanese seems to be the main language in this place. Alan was born into a family of servants, just as he selected at the beginning, in a border village where peasants pay taxes to a lord in order to farm the land. His father's name is Rodden. Alan believes Rodden is around 20 years old and sees him as a typical family man who works hard to support his child. His mother's name is Teresha, a very beautiful and kind woman who appears to be in her late teens. That night, after yawning in front of his parents, Alan is put to bed, but instead of sleeping, he raises his hands and mentally commands "status window," imagining it would work like in any isekai. Frustrated that nothing appears, he understands that being spoiled and all is nice, but it is already time for him to start being a conjurer, since he has been trying for a year without success. Then, after some effort, that same night he manages to make a magic book appear in front of him, which makes him scream and immediately alerts his parents. They run to see what happened, but before they can see the book, Alan makes it disappear right as they arrive. Since he pretends to be asleep, his parents believe he was only dreaming or something like that. When the adults leave, the child brings the book back and, upon opening it, finally confirms that he really belongs to the conjurer class. Because of his lack of experience, he is still limited to summoning only a few insects and beasts. Other than that, he notices a message in the book from someone named Elmia, the god of creation. In this message, Elmia says it took some time to finish developing the class properly, and now that it has been chosen by players, none of them will be allowed to switch. Alan interprets this as the reason why his book took so long to arrive. Setting that aside, he notices there are no tutorials explaining how to play the game, meaning he will have to figure out everything on his own. To test his abilities, the first thing Alan tries is creating an insect, and when he does, a card with an insect of rank H appears in front of him. But upon hearing his mother approaching, he pretends to sleep again. Because he is only 1 year old, he ends up falling asleep for real, unable to control his tiredness. The next day, his normal peasant life continues as always. However, whenever he is alone, Alan now has something new to do, because he can finally develop his techniques as a true conjurer. After creating the card, he summons the insect inside it, a somewhat dumb grasshopper that doesn't understand commands and acts like a regular bug. Checking the book to understand how it works, Alan sees that he must give the creature a name, so he starts calling it Denka. As a pleasant surprise, he notices that Denka gives him a status buff of +1 in endurance and agility. He becomes so happy that he shouts, once again drawing his mother's attention, who understands his strange reactions less and less each day. She even sees Denka jumping near her foot and, startled, ends up stepping on him and killing him at least until he is summoned again. As the days pass and Alan keeps practicing, he eventually learns to summon rank H beasts as well. In this case, a little mouse that is also dumb just like Denka, according to Alan. Even so, it gives him a +1 buff to HP and agility, along with a skill called Dash. At least the little creature uses this ability whenever Alan commands it, which is already progressed. Tenka, for his part, has the skill Leap. As he develops these abilities, Alan reflects on how this world must be filled with huge, powerful creatures' enemies he certainly won't be able to defeat with the dynamic duo he can summon today. The boy also discovers that he's able to store up to 10 conjuration cards for each creature, and that the most important among them are the buffs. For example, by storing 10 rat cards, his attack increases by 10 points, which certainly explains why Alan showed his parents a strength far greater than what a simple baby should display. In any case, knowing that the experience needed to level up in Hell mode is 100 times higher than normal, the boy has been struggling quite a bit just to advance a few steps. Suddenly, in the middle of the morning, Rodden arrives home covered in blood and holding a spear, but reassures his wife by explaining that he wasn't hurt, it was just the result of hunting a boar a short while ago. Alan shows interest in seeing the boar, so his father puts him on his shoulder to take him for a little walk. Thus, this was the first time Alan was being taken outside the house. Looking around, he was impressed by the beauty and tranquility of that late afternoon. Along the way, Rodden points to a flock of monsters called Albahiron, which always gather and migrate north at this time of year, indicating the arrival of autumn. Speaking of which, Rodden says he named Alan after the Albahiron, because for them, the sky is the limit. These creatures can use their wings to fly anywhere in the world they want true freedom. However, he admits he got scolded when he told Teresia that, since he had chosen their son's name based on a monster. Sometime later, the two reach the boar that had been taken down, a gigantic creature that makes the baby open his mouth in awe. Getting closer, he admits it must be terrifying to face something that size. One of the hunting companions, Gerda, announces Rodden as the one mainly responsible for killing the boar, which earns him a big tribute from the other men. Gerda notices his friend brought his son, so Alan introduces himself with a level of politeness that is literally frightening. Since Gerda has a 1-year-old daughter, Krina, who is nowhere near having that kind of vocabulary, Alan asks if that big beast is strong, and the man says it takes 20 hunters to bring down a C-rank creature like that. 10 months later, Alan was able to conjure rank G creature cards, as well as fuse summons, and the space for cards in his inventory had doubled, which means twice the amount of buffs he could receive. Since fusion required a lot of mana points, he ate and took good care of himself to accumulate the amount needed to use the technique. When everything was ready, he tried mixing 2 rat cards, but despite his excitement, he realized he still didn't have enough MP. Frustrated, he decided to just create another rank G conjuration card, but he couldn't do that either with his current mana limit. Upon turning 3, the boy could create creature cards such as frogs and moles. Mixing the two, he created a card of a rank G bird, granting a +2 buff to agility and intelligence. From that, he named the bird Chappie, which had the skill vocal mimicry, basically Chappie perfectly imitating Alan's voice. Then he conjured the frog, which he began to call Hopper, bearer of the skill Taunt, useful for distracting enemies. The mole, of course, had the skill Dig, very useful for hideouts and traps. As he developed and studied more about his class, Alan discovered that the secret was to know every status deeply so he could create a powerful combination of buffs for each situation. In his opinion, this was a complex and challenging game, exactly what he had been looking for a long time. On the other hand, it's worth noting that Alan is far from summoning creatures strong enough to stand against the possible dragons and boars the world has. In any case, now that it is 3 in the afternoon, the boy hears the voice of a girl challenging him to a knight's duel, one of the activities he doesn't seem to like very much. Even so, Alan presents himself for a duel against Krina, the fierce, at least that's what she called herself. In turn, his rival self proclaimed herself Alan the Honored, and although he pretended to be motivated for the fight, he grumbled internally about having to take this seriously every time. Anyway, serious or not, when the fight begins, Alan takes a series of blows from a wooden sword at an incredible speed. Even though he put all his buffs into agility, the boy admits he can barely block the swords. In the end, Krina breaks Alan's sword in half and secures the victory. At the end of the afternoon, she goes to the boy's house to announce her achievement. Smiling and pregnant with another baby, Teresia asks the girl to head home before it gets dark, and that's what she does. Lying there shattered like it was nothing, Alan suffers the pain of defeat on the ground. Still, at dinner time, the boy volunteers of his own free will to help with the potato harvest, knowing that his mother is heavily pregnant and can't work normally. Internally, Alan knows that at this point he has the vitality of an adult man, even though he's only 3 years old in practice. Teresia and Rodden say that children should never have to work, and that the boy should keep playing with Krina, especially because he already helps inside the house. The child insists, but his parents advise him to enjoy himself as much as he can, because the time will come when he will have to work on the farm, whether he wants to or not. Hearing this, Alan concludes that he and his parents will always be servants until they die, practicing this exhausting labor every day without being able to change their fate. Changing the subject, Teresia and her husband say they saw their son throwing stones at a tree earlier and want to know why. Alan says that his parents themselves warned him about the existence of monsters outside the house, so he has been training to protect his mother with stones. That said, while his father hugged him proudly, the truth was that Alan was only trying to see if he could learn techniques that went beyond conjuration. Teresia asks if her son is also going to protect Krina, but when he remembers how their last duel went, the boy figures she can already handle herself. Rodden comments that he can't wait for the two of them to attend their evaluation ceremony, and when Alan asks what that is, his mother explains that when he turns 5, he will take part in a divine ceremony that determines what talent he possesses. Rodden hopes it will be a talent good enough to pull his son away from a servant's life, and that hope lifts everyone's spirits in the house that night. Some time later, it begins to snow in the village. After continuing his training, Alan is now able to maintain a summoned creature for an entire day without any problems. On the other hand, in his duels against Krina, since she also comes from a conjurer background, the boy struggles a lot to withstand the girl's overwhelming pace. She keeps dominating every match and knocking the kid flat. One day, after Alan loses yet again, Teresia ends up falling to the ground when she gets startled by Denka, which causes her water to break, and now she's about to give birth again. She is quickly taken to a bed in a warm place so everything can go well. But because he's doing everything by himself, Rodden starts worrying that things won't go as smoothly as he hoped. Since Alan is the only one there to help, Krina runs off to call her parents, so Gerda shows up with Matilda, his wife, to help the poor man. Hours pass as Matilda handles the situation and makes sure the delivery happens without complications. It's such a difficult and drawn-out labor that it lasts until the next day, until finally a baby's cry reaches the ears of the men sleeping outside. When the father goes into the room and learns it's another boy, Teresia asks him to choose the name. So Rodden names their second son Mesh. Teresia really likes it, but hopes he didn't take the name from some monster. The poor guy tries to explain himself in every possible way, but Teresia starts laughing. When everyone begins laughing together, Alan can't help thinking about something he has thought ever since he reincarnated into this world. He isn't even a little bit sad about leaving his entire past behind, because the difference between his old life and this one is enormous. It's true, of course, that he'll give everything he has to progress in the game to obtain the best equipment and spells, but when his parents call him over to meet his brother, Alan feels that there is much more to this life than glory and achievements. From that moment on, he decides that his greatest goal is to free his family from servitude. Sometime later, when Alan is 5 years old, he asks his father what the aptitude ceremony is like, and the man explains that it's a special event where everyone from servants to nobles must participate when they turn 5. If Alan shows good aptitude, for example, he might have a chance to rise in life and stop being a servant. The problem is that he'll have several rivals. The boy doesn't understand what that means, so his father explains that when they first arrived in these lands, people started having child after child. In other words, there are a whole bunch of kids the same age as Alan right now. At that moment, Krina appears over the father's shoulder and calls Alan so they can go to the event together. With that, the four gather, and after the walk, Krina is impressed by the number of houses they find in the village where the test will take place. While Alan looks around in admiration, Krina swears she will become a knight if she's designated as a swordsman. When they arrive at a church where the test will be held, Alan notices the commoners wearing clothes much nicer than his, obviously having more money than his family. He even hears some guys picking on him for being a servant. Amid all this, the religious officials open the church door and ask for the blessing of Elmia, the god of creation, so that all children may have equal opportunities. Since this country has seen heroes whose bloodlines once belonged to servitude. For example, Claces, the saint, was a humble commoner by birth, while Diverg, the sword lord, was once merely a servant. Feeling hopeful after hearing this, Alan recalls that before he reincarnated, he saw that classes like hero and sword lord needed to start in lower social classes. Next, the participants are called inside the church to begin the long-awaited evaluation. Alan notices the statue of Elmia, the god of creation. Then the leader of the religious group invites the village chief, Deboji, to begin the evaluations with his son, Palomas. Every child must touch the crystal ball. Then the attributes and talents that are revealed will be written on the metal plate behind the priest. With that, tension takes over the village leader, who starts sweating from so much anticipation. Not very differently, his son approaches the crystal ball. Then his attributes appear on the metal plate, arranged in the same way Alan saw on his own status page. According to what was written, Palomas has the talent to be a merchant, which leaves his father extremely satisfied and emotional, not understanding much and thinking any talent becomes a reason to celebrate. Alan checks his grimoire, which only he can see, and notices that the attributes are displayed as ranks instead of numbers. Meanwhile, another boy takes the evaluation, and upon discovering he has no talent at all, he runs off crying to his father, who lovingly hugs him. Next, a cocky kid slaps his own face before discovering his talent, for good luck. Then he celebrates when he learns he is an Axeman, and Alan is impressed that this boy, Dagora, got one of the attributes with rank of the first one he has seen in his life. As time goes by, all the children take their evaluations until only Alan and Krina are left at the end. Eager to get this thing done, Krina runs toward the crystal ball, and as she extends her hand, the magical item emits an extraordinary glow. Then the metal plate shows that the girl has the talent to become a sword lord, which is practically a miracle. While everyone is stunned by the rarity of such a powerful talent, Krina grumbles that she wanted to be a swordsman, and Alan understands why this girl has always been overpowered in their duels. Now, the son of Rodin is finally called for his evaluation, the last child of the event. Without showing anxiety, Alan only needs to touch the crystal ball and finally show his parents that he is a conjurer. However, he is literally thrown backward because of the brutal magical force radiating from the item, along with a light twice as bright as when Krina was evaluated. Unable to read, Rodin runs to ask the priest what the result was, but incredibly, the boy has no talent at all, where his class should be. The plate shows a glitch filled with random letters. Enraged, Alan begins cursing the families of the devs who can't fix this piece of junk game. But Rodin remains calm and calls his son to go back home. Hours later, the two return to the arms of Teresia and Mash, which warms Alan's heart immediately. And not just then when everyone gathers around the fire. His parents make it clear that he will always be precious to them, regardless of having talent or not. Faced with so much affection, Alan recognizes that his family is so poor they don't even have a bathtub. But that doesn't stop him from being happy. At bedtime, the boy reviews his grimoire and checks that he truly has all rank E attributes, which leads Alan to discover something. He is the only one in this world playing on Hell mode. Everyone who took the evaluation was 5 years old, which means they should all be level 1 just like Alan. However, it seems that the rank system probably reflects how much development they can expect each time they level up. So the reason Alan has all rank E attributes is because his growth speed in Hell mode is almost 100 times slower than normal, and this seems to mean that his ranks are showing the same fraction of the real value. After spending a lifetime playing easy games, Kenichi Yamada was reborn into this world where he is the only player on Hell mode, which could drive anyone insane in his place, but Alan refuses to give up. After all, he threw himself into this challenge precisely to put ridiculously easy games in their place. Speaking of which, it was pretty clear that the nonsense written in place of his class was just a clumsy glitch. So the devs should fix it soon, and Alan is ready to complain to those guys until everything is perfect, just to prove that no one should mess with a gamer with no social life. The next morning, Alan asks his mother why his father is like that, since the man has been acting strange since last night. Near nightfall, the whole family goes to Krina's house to celebrate the girl being discovered as a sword lord. Excited, she tells Alan that a sword lord is stronger than a swordsman, and the kid pretends to play dumb to hide that he didn't know. Matilda also says the village chief stopped by to gift the family a liquor, and trying to hide his happiness, Rodin keeps a straight face and tells everyone to enjoy the drink. Alan starts to suspect that his father is jealous of Krina for becoming a sword lord, but he doesn't think his father is that kind of person. Gerda asks Rodin to take the first sip of the liquor, because according to him, visitors should drink first. Faced with Gerda's insistence, an argument begins between the two until Gerda reveals that Rodin wants to cut ties between the two families. Cornered, Rodden explains that this wasn't what he wanted, and that Krina's talent is so extraordinary that she might even become a knight and serve the country, having a good chance of reaching nobility one day. Because of that, in his opinion, important people like her shouldn't waste time socializing with servants. With that said, the argument between Rodden and Gerda starts getting close to turning into a fight. So Alan asks Krina to do something about the two of them, but their wives get there first, showing that physical aggression can also solve problems. After the punch Matilda lands on her husband's face, Alan learns that you shouldn't mess with that woman. The boy asks her if those two have always been this hard-headed, and she says that becoming parents made them mature to a certain extent, because back then they used to trade punches almost every day. Teresia says the two couples have been friends since childhood, and that's why they grew up together. While Matilda tells the story of when they found out about the founding of a new village 10 years ago, and the four of them decided to build their own houses on that land. So their houses look quite similar. Rodden and Gerda start competing again to see who worked more on the construction. But they make peace after drinking the liquor they both haven't touched since they got married. At dawn, while working, Gerda learns that the Knight Order is after Krina. For that reason, alongside his friends, he takes his daughter to the city where yesterday's evaluation took place. Surprisingly, the news about a sword lord existing among the commoners spread quickly, making many people already aware that Krina was the talented child. Suddenly, Dogora appears holding a club and looking angry, and Alan remembers he was that axe-wielding brat from the evaluation. Dogora asks what Alan is doing there, since this city isn't a place for talentless losers. Immediately, Krina steps between them to protect her friend, and Gerda has to hold his daughter back before she beats the kid up. At that moment, the Knight Order arrives, imposing respect on the population as they watch in admiration the arrival of Captain Zenoff, a sword master, and his subordinates. When they get off their horses, the village chief calls Gerda and his daughter, and Alan notices how excited his friend is about all of this. It's only been 3 years since the two of them started pretending to duel, and now she is standing before a golden opportunity. However, Gerda doesn't seem pleased with the captain's proposal for Krina to join the Knight Order, arguing that she is still too little and doesn't have the strength to hold a real sword. Zenoff not only says the girl is a sword lord, but that he will take it as a lie if the father refuses the proposal, a direct attempt to deceive Baron Granvelle. According to the officer, falsifying the evaluation is punishable by death, and seeing the father hesitate, it will be necessary to verify whether the child's talent is legitimate or not. Given the situation, the village chief proposes a duel. Gerda begs for mercy, but Zenoff makes it clear that if Krina doesn't fight, she will be executed along with her family. Despair overtakes everyone watching that cruel scene except Krina, who, upon seeing a sword being offered to her, runs to it and shows unbelievable confidence. Thus, the child is placed before the vice captain, who introduces himself as Leibrand and belongs to the Lancer class. After announcing herself as Krina, the knight, she charges at the officer without any fear, quite the opposite. She acts as if she were playing or something like that, and there is a smile on her face that doesn't go away. The two begin exchanging blows, but Leibrand blocks the girl's attack easily. While Dogora is impressed by the girl's strength, Alan evaluates that perhaps her swordsmanship skill is already at level 5 from all the practice they do every day. Even so, the vice captain counterattacks and forces Krina to block with difficulty, making Gerda more and more desperate. The girl doesn't lose confidence and tries to retaliate, but opens her guard too much and takes a strong kick to the stomach, being thrown into the wall hard enough to crush the bricks. Gerda tries to run after his daughter, but he is held back by 2 soldiers, as well as Alan and Rodden, who are prevented from helping their friend. Defeat seemed certain, as did the execution of Krina and her family, but the Sword Lord rises again and begins to emit a magical energy that makes the rival's left eye tremble. With that, the girl charges at her opponent again and shows strength and agility 4 times greater than before, forcing Leibrand to give his all to avoid being cut apart. After a brutal series of blows, Krina manages to slice the vice captain's blade in half and almost takes his skull with it. Then, Zenoff declares the end of the duel and Krina's victory. As everyone watching the fight starts celebrating, the captain approaches Gerda and congratulates him for having raised a legitimate sword lord, then asks forgiveness for doubting the man's word. Gerda, however, keeps a stern face and focuses only on protecting his daughter, while Zenoff asks for a chance to discuss the future of such a talented young girl and if it makes him feel more comfortable. Jurda can bring his friends to the meeting. Hours later, at the village chief's residence, Jurda keeps a stern face the entire time after seeing her daughter's life put at risk. Alan understands why the chief's son is sitting at this table, but he has no idea why that axe warrior kid is here with his father. Maybe they're desperate not to be overshadowed by the Sword Lord. At that moment, Xenoph explains that he was sent by Baron Granville to determine whether it's true that a Sword Lord has appeared among them, and the result couldn't be clearer after the duel. Then Xenoph informs Deboji that, by order of their master, this village shall be called Krina Village from today onward. According to the captain, 3 years ago a Sword Lord was born into a count's family. But Alan doesn't understand how, since, from what he remembers of the game's rules, someone of that class can only be born as a servant, commoner, or baron. Anyway, the officer adds that this person even served the royal family but failed to meet expectations, which led to a reevaluation that determined this person was actually just an ordinary swordsman. It was later discovered that many members of the nobility greatly exaggerated this individual's talents, which ultimately led to the creation of this rule of always reevaluating children who are considered special. With that said, Xenoph apologizes once again to Jurda for subjecting his daughter to such a difficult judgment, and asks him to raise the girl with dedication, because at the age of 12 she will be able to study at the academy and, eventually, serve the royal family. Dogora asks if anyone can enter this academy to become a knight, and the boy's father apologizes for his son's interruption. Showing patience, the captain replies that an instructor will be sent to this village, so Dogora should dedicate himself to studying and training to earn his approval for the academy. Krina says that Alan can study with them, but Dogora says that brainless people like him, without talent, aren't capable of doing that. Krina quickly rushes to defend her friend again, and Alan finds it funny to be 40 years old and being defended by a 5-year-old girl. By the way, Xenoph finally notices Alan, and upon realizing who his father is, he stands up from his chair to greet Rodden, the boar hunter, a true local legend. Rodden doesn't understand where all this admiration is coming from, and the captain explains that his baron is passionate about the boar meat served by their village. In that moment, Alan thinks about how his father and the other workers risked their lives to hunt that beast. But the baron was the one who kept the meat. Still, he is happy about the respect the captain is showing Rodden. After the meeting ends and the two families separate, Rodden comments to his son about how Krina might become a heroine like the ones from the stories, but that even servants like him can sometimes be acknowledged by nobles. In any case, the man believes his son still has a chance to achieve great deeds in life, since he carries his father's genes. With that said, Alan takes out 2 fruits he stole from the meeting to give to his mother and brother, and the two burst into laughter when Rodden shows that he stole even more. The next day, the boy is overjoyed with some excellent news. He finally leveled up his conjuration skill, unlocking the enchantment technique and gaining the ability to summon F-rank creatures. Apparently, he still needs to fuse 2 cards together to create a new one. Just like what happened with Chappie, the bird. Right away, the kid gets totally hyped at the thought of summoning some Shinryu-like dragon, and he also gets excited about the fact that his card inventory limit increased from 20 to 30. It's been 2 years since Alan last leveled up his conjuration skill, which explains his happiness. That night, as the family gathers around the indoor fire, Teresia feels her 3rd child kicking inside her now huge belly. Alan offers to wash the dishes to ease his mother's workload, while Mash asks if he's going to get a new baby brother. Teresia comments that, because the kicks are a bit gentler this time, the next baby will be a girl. When her husband points out that it's time to think of a name, she reminds him that he promised she would be the one to choose the girls' names. While Teresia thinks about it, Alan celebrates after receiving a message from Elmia in his book saying that all his mana points have been fully restored. His parents notice that he's always spaced out since they can't see the book. They must assume the kid is a bit delusional, and they joke about it with him. So the boy changes the subject and mentions how his father's scar has improved. Rodden explains that he got that mark after going through the trial of the gods during today's boar hunt. When Alan asks what that means, his father explains that the trial of the gods is a special moment that sometimes occurs during hunts, when you suddenly feel a surge of energy that heals all wounds and wipes away all exhaustion, which is always great. Hearing this, Alan imagines that this must be how people describe the process of leveling up in this world. Since his father is a veteran boar hunter, highly respected by the community, even though Alan can't check his status, He assumes his father must be at a pretty high level. On the other hand, even though Alan celebrated his recent evolution, he's still level 1 and he'll stay that way unless he fights creatures strong enough to give him some XP. The problem is that servants like him can't leave the village without permission, unless they're going out to hunt, which is the only exception. Because of that, Alan volunteers for the next hunting expedition. But Rodden shuts him down immediately, saying that hunting isn't a game, but something extremely dangerous that can cost lives. Even Teresia is shocked by her husband's bluntness. Alan doesn't say another word about it, but he doesn't give up on evolving in his own way. Before going to sleep, he checks the book again and thinks he finally understood the message he received. After all, he had sent some complaints in full toxic player fashion, which ended up paying off since the devs fixed the text bug. Besides that, the message said, "We sent a prophetic message to the Great Pope to warn everyone." Alan finds the strange combination of words amusing, and then reflects on how all his attributes are ranked E because leveling up in Hell mode is so slow. However, the devs also sent an attachment showing only the raw data, revealing that Alan actually has S rank mana points and intelligence. Looking closer, he also has a few A and C ranks, which makes him roughly on the same level as Krina overall. Excited by this, Alan can't wait to test his enchantment skill, so he tries it on Denka. The result is a boost to the monster's stats, the same stats that work as buffs for the summoner resistance and agility. However, when Alan enchants the insect, the enchantment does not affect the buff, which stays the same. When summoned, Denka wasn't larger or more intimidating, even though he was clearly stronger. This shows Alan that being a summoner is much more than simply calling forth giant creatures. Speaking of size, Teresia eventually walks into the room and is startled at the sight of Denka, so she steps on the poor thing again and kills it. A few days later, in the morning, Rodden heads out to hunt, while Alan, after spending several nights enchanting and removing enchantments, discovers that card enchantments don't disappear, which means that as long as he has mana to spare, it's a good idea to enchant every card he has in his inventory. He experimented with several card fusions, but still hasn't managed to unlock any new type of monster. After using every possible combination, he's left with only one, so the boy prays that all his luck is gathered for this final attempt. He combines the F-rank insect with the F-rank bird, and the result is quite unexpected, although not exactly satisfying. The card he gets is called Grass F, and the kid had no idea that grass was something you could even summon, to be honest. On the other hand, the thing has an impressive buff of plus 7 mana points, which can go up to 12. For a summoner like Alan, that's pure gold. Normally, he would expect to spend decades leveling up in Hell mode, but maybe this new card can cut a few years off the journey. Without wasting time, he summons the card and notices it's basically a walking apple. He decides to call the creature Apo, even though he knows it doesn't sound very original. Looking at Apo's twig-like arms and legs, Alan assumes it isn't meant for combat. Then the creature displays its panel showing the skill Aroma, which essentially means it buries itself underground and grows a small sprout from the top of its head that sticks out above the surface. At least, as the skill's name suggests, the smell is pleasant like essential oil. Alan has no idea what this is supposed to be useful for, but he celebrates the fact that his garden is now one step closer to becoming a botanical paradise, before remembering that he didn't come to this iSky world to become a gardener. Teresia comes over to call her son for lunch, so Alan rushes to tell Apo to return to the card, but his command simply doesn't work. When Teresia approaches, having no idea there was a sprout like that growing in the yard, she admires the plant's aroma while the boy wonders what the purpose of that smell is. Later, Alan trains as usual with Krina. Even though he didn't get beaten up this time, it's still obvious he has no chance of going head-to-head with that girl. On the other hand, to his surprise, Krina feels that her partner is tougher than before, and this makes Alan immediately grab his book to check. In the end, his swordsmanship skill really has gone up to level 3, and the expansion of his inventory gave him more space to buff his defense and attack. The boy even wonders whether Apo's scent has anything to do with it. For example, he remembers that Fido was his first card, with a skill called Bite. He really wanted to test that spell, but he was afraid the stray dog would attack people in the street. Krina then asks if he's feeling okay, because he's been talking to himself for a straight 20 seconds. Toward the end of the afternoon, after so much practice, Alan has already thrown stones at the same spot on the tree about 20,000 times, which opened a hole in the trunk, yet there's still no sign that he's leveled up. Besides that, the poor kid can't devote all his time to training. since he needs to watch his little brother and help his mother with chores because she's pregnant. For a moment, he thinks about giving up. But then he asks himself, what if I'm just one stone away from leveling up? Well, he's about to throw another stone when his brother calls his attention to the many plants that have sprouted in the yard, basically forming a little garden. Setting that aside for now, Alan picks up his book and thinks that, because of aroma, opposed skill, he managed to reduce his total mana recovery time from 6 hours to 5, which gives him more time to do other things. However, the truth is that it still feels like he never has enough time. Looking up at the sky, Alan observes the migration of the Albahiron, the birds that inspired his name. At nightfall, while Mash is sleeping, Alan and Teresia feel that Rodden is taking too long to return from the hunt. Suddenly, the worst happens. Rodden's fellow hunters appear carrying the father of the family on a wooden plank, under heavy rain, and he has serious injuries. They bring him inside while the others wait outside. Gerda explains to the family that Rodden was pierced through the stomach by a boar's tusk. Trying to stay calm, Teresia notes that they already cauterized the wound, which stopped the bleeding. Gerda says they kept him alive thanks to a healing herb called Mueller's flower. Teresia doesn't understand how they even got access to something so expensive. And the hunter recalls the day the knights came to the village to test Krina. As part of their apology for being too rough with the girl, the captain gave the hunters a handful of gold coins, and looking at things now, they'd be in deep trouble if they hadn't received that money. Suddenly, a few furious hunters start blaming a certain commoner for what happened to Rodden. Because of all the shouting, Mash wakes up and starts crying at the obviously stressful and frightening scene for such a young child. Seeing this, the men decide to step outside and give the family some space. After everyone leaves, Alan asks Gerda what this story about a commoner being at fault is. Gerda explains that a few days ago they were called by the chief and ordered to include some ordinary citizens in the hunt. As everyone knows, boar meat is extremely valuable to the nobles, and it's also known that most of that meat stays with them, leaving only the scraps for the hunters. From time to time, they trade the meat for salt, firewood, or other essential goods that are very hard to obtain otherwise. It's also important to point out that no commoner had ever volunteered for a hunt before. It's a very dangerous job, and deaths are not uncommon. Servants, on the other hand, have no choice but to risk their lives to earn their daily bread. However, this time things were different. The ordinary citizens wanted to participate because they heard about a hero among the servants, Rodden. The day Captain Zenoff called Rodden a legend in front of everyone, the compliment spread and created the belief that inexperienced commoners would be safe as long as Rodden was present during the hunts. Naturally, Gerda and Rodden were not happy at all about suddenly having inexperienced men on expeditions, but there was nothing they could do against Deboji's direct orders. Making things worse, some of the commoners didn't even take the training seriously, convinced they could dump all the work on the more experienced servants. Then, today was finally the day of the hunt involving all those people. The commoners were given the easiest task of all: attract the boar and keep its attention. But when things started to heat up, the cowards panicked and ran, throwing the whole trained strategy out the window. In the middle of that, the boar attacked one of the fleeing men, so Rodden stepped in to prevent the worst and ended up getting brutally struck. With his head down, Gerda says that the boar was killed at the end of the hunt and that tomorrow he will bring Rodden his share of the meat. Before leaving, he asks Alan and Teresia to stay strong for their family. Seeing him go, Alan feels useless for not having helped at any moment. Carried by that feeling, the boy stays up all night trying to help his mother in every way he can, but she wants him to sleep since he is clearly exhausted. Suddenly, Rodden wakes up in a panic, shouting the boar's name, causing an uproar in the whole family. At that very moment, Alan questions why on earth he has been so selfish, since all he thinks about is becoming stronger. But what good is strength without a purpose? Life is harsh for the servants, the class he belongs to. For them, this isn't a game. These people give everything they have all the time. They kill a lion a day just to survive. And Alan has a little brother to take care of, with another one on the way. In the midst of all this, Gerda arrives with their share of Rodden's meat and is glad to see her partner looking a bit better. She then promises that she will help the family protect themselves from the winter cold while Teresia's husband is unable to work. Motivated, Alan asks his father to rest and promises to keep his family safe. This time, Rodden doesn't argue with his son or try to hold him back, because the boy's expression is pure determination. In fact, Alan starts joining the servants group in lighter activities, and strangely enough, He shows unbelievable strength for a child his age. Given the circumstances, Alan grew tired of pretending to be weak and decided to show his real strength. The situation is dire, and since the village already sees Krina as a heroine, no one will be too shocked to work in physical labor. The conjurer removed all the mana point buffs and converted them into physical strength, then used the excuse that he inherited that strength from his father. From the moment he actually began working, the boy realized how unfair it is that the nobles keep most of everything the servants collect, and the little that remains makes it difficult to survive the approaching winter. One day, Deboji, the village chief, appears at Rodden's house with a young man who ended up causing the hunter's injury. They brought fruit as a way to apologize, and Alan feels anger toward the guy when he kneels down to ask forgiveness for what he did. Rodden doesn't go easy on him either and tells the boy to be more careful. But the one who really raises her voice is Teresia, making it very clear that the kid's mistake almost cost her husband his life, and that every family has loved and valuable people, no matter what class they belong to. At that moment, the servants who are friends of Rodden show up at his door to demonstrate their affection, respect, and admiration, and that makes Alan conclude that he has the best parents in the world. Later, when he finds a bit of free time, Alan clears a space in the field to conjure a bunch of jump frogs. Next, he hides in the woods after setting up several traps, then uses the provoke ability to lure animals that see the frogs as prey, so that he can get enough meat to survive the winter. With everything set, the strategy works, but only to a certain extent. After all, it wasn't just any animal that was attracted, but a gigantic albahiron, a rank B monster. Checking his status, Alan sees that his enchantment skill has risen to level 2, which increases the enchanted creature's stats from +10 to +20, and he has already enchanted all the monsters in his inventory. Faced with this, and determined to help his family, Alan doesn't back down and throws a stone at the giant bird's head, then takes advantage of the surprise to land a wooden sword strike on the creature's neck only to receive a kick in return. He then summons several Fidos, the dogs whose main ability is bite. The pack surrounds the albahiron and attacks, but although they manage to deal some damage, they are defeated by the monster. Alan tries to charge in with his wooden sword, but takes an even stronger blow than the last one. On top of that, he has been losing the buffs from each creature that was defeated by the enemy, weakening his stats and leaving him extremely vulnerable. Alan knows he needs to think of something quickly, because the bird is extremely aggressive, and at any moment one of its pecks could end up hitting him. So he summons Chiu Chiu, a pair of energy-draining creatures that leap directly onto the albahiron and begin their work by sticking to its skin. While the enemy looks dazed from the absorption, Alan recalls how his defensive ability drops significantly if the summoned creature is defeated, so he can't afford to keep losing so many summons. Therefore, when the two Chiu Chiu are defeated, the summoner brings out several more at once, along with a pack of dogs to attack. After all, if Alan is going to lose strength, then the albahiron should also be harmed in the process. Soon, once all the summons surround the opponent and open a window for the human to strike, Alan swings his sword forcefully at the bird's head, knocking it to the ground and ending the fight. Immediately, Alan's book appears to notify him that he earned 100 experience points, a great reason for the boy to celebrate intensely. Without delay, he heads back home carrying none other than a giant albahiron. How he even managed to bring it that far only God knows. Mash starts crying in front of the monstrous creature, while the father notices the injuries on his eldest son's body. Examining the marks on the bird, Gerda is fascinated that the kid managed to defeat a monster like this using only stones and a wooden sword. But he also notices the dog bite marks, forcing Alan to pretend that he was so focused on the fight that he must have used any means necessary to avoid becoming albahiron food. Confused, Gerda asks Rodden if he can begin the bleeding, while Alan notices the huge bump on the man's head, probably caused by Krina. Later, Gerda starts the bleeding process with Alan's help, and at the beginning he explains to the boy that an albahiron weighs around 60 kilos, and after the bloodletting about 20 kilos become dried meat. The edible portion is roughly half the body, and the feathers also have market value, although 60% of everything has to go to the village chief. Alan is shocked that even this turns into taxes, and Gerda laments that at most they overlook E-rank horned rabbits, but if it's a D-rank albahiron, there's no chance. That said, the hunter removes the magic stone from inside the corpse and explains that stones of rank D and above must be delivered. But since they don't use them in the village anyway, it doesn't matter much. On the other hand, Gerda remembers that Alan, still a child, had to face a magical beast because his father was injured due to an order from the chief. And maybe that could open room for a more favorable negotiation for the servants. With that, Alan approaches and whispers a few things in his friend's ear. Later, at the village chief's house, Gerda tells Deboji what happened, including the fact that Alan had gotten involved in such a dangerous hunt. Even so, the chief's eyes widen with desire upon seeing the much-coveted bird. So Gerda asks to keep the rest of the bird if he hands over all the feathers. Deboji refuses, claiming the feudal lord ordered the meat delivery to be increased. Since that's the case, Gerda offers, in addition to the feathers, the Albahiron's magic stone, and he begins hinting that the person responsible for Rodden's son having to hunt was the village chief himself after all. The hunter wouldn't have been injured if he hadn't had to take care of inexperienced grown men during the job. He also emphasizes that the family of the greatest hero among the servants could end up starving this winter. While Alan pretends to be extremely hungry, making a pitiful face, realizing he is at fault, Deboji ends up admitting that his order caused problems, which allows the servants to push forward and get what they want. In the end, everything works out, and they keep all the meat in exchange for the feathers and the Albahiron's magic stone. The next day, Alan seems to have enjoyed the game of hunting Albahirons so much that he repeats the same strategy that worked last time. He summons hoppers to serve as bait, this time attracting 2 birds at once. However, he was better prepared now, so as soon as the Albahirons landed, he sent the Chiu-Chiu to drain the enemy's energy. Then Alan throws a stone at each bird's head to further destabilize them, and sends his pack of Fidos to deal even more damage. With the birds subdued, the boy charges with his wooden sword and strikes both skulls, finishing them off much more easily than yesterday. After capturing that first Albahiron, Alan began hunting every 3 days, and this was the first time none of his summoned creatures were defeated. Since each bird grants 100 experience points, the summoner earns 200, enough to finally reach level 2. Extremely excited, Alan asks to check his status and is astonished by the evolution, though he laments that the increased stat values are multiplied by only 0.6 instead of rising in accordance with the level values, which is very strict. On the other hand, he was the one who chose Hell mode, so he has to deal with it. Still, in the end, the summoner is full of joy, because the reward for playing on the hardest mode is actually quite satisfying, despite everything. Now that he has reached level 2, he decides he might be able to tell his parents what's been happening. With a smile on his face, the boy returns home with the 2 Albahirons and impresses his father with his achievement. After that, Alan is surprised by the arrival of Krina, who, as always, wants to fight with her best friend. While dueling with the Sword Lord, the boy reflects on how today's hunt reached the goal of 10 magical beasts, and that by making dried meat from them, they'll have enough food to get through the winter and any leftovers can be traded for firewood. He also wants to take full advantage of this Albahiron migration period, since it's the time when they are most numerous in the region. To reach level 3, he needs to hunt 20 of them, something that seems very hard to accomplish this year. Distracted by all his thoughts, Alan ends up taking a hit to the top of his head and earns himself a big lump. That night, he decides to tell his parents that he received a divine oracle from Lord Elmia when he was 1 year old, granting him wisdom and power, as well as a trial that, according to his own words, not even 100 people would be able to overcome. While Teresia questions why her son, of all people, has to go through this, Rodden asks whether this trial was completed that morning, since earlier he still had the wound on his face, but now the injury is gone. By the way, the village hero says that he also overcame a divine trial, which made him believe that his son had done the same. The boy's mother asks about the result of last year's appraisal ceremony, and he explains that, 2 months ago, Elmia gave him another oracle. Realizing this happened recently, Rodden scolds his son for calling the god only by name instead of Lord Elmia. After apologizing, Alan explains that, at the appraisal ceremony, his abilities were low because it was assumed that his speed in overcoming the trials would be very slow. And the reason why no talent appeared was because it is a new talent, so it couldn't be evaluated. In other words, Alan does have a gift, but he isn't able to say exactly what it is. In truth, he does know, but he decided he can't say it yet because he's afraid that the fact he can summon magical beasts may cause problems if it's discovered. And beyond that, of course, he has no idea how to reveal that he reincarnated. Amid all this, his mother hugs him and says it would have been better if he had told them earlier. In any case, she now understands why her son always practiced swordsmanship and trained with stones from a young age. as well as why he faced such dangerous challenges. He did all of that to overcome the trial given by the gods. Rodden then asks what his son intends to do about the challenge he was given, and he assures him he will face it head-on. The father understands after all. It is a trial given directly by the Creator God, and says that his son can rely on his parents if he needs anything. Speaking of which, Rodden asks the boy not to tell anyone else about this, because it would be bad if people thought Alan was a lying imposter inventing things in the name of the gods. On the other hand, the father says he would like to at least tell Gerda, since the man keeps bragging that Krina is a sword lord, so it would be nice to show that his own son is also incredible. Sometime later, already in winter, while Alan and Gerda prepare the Albahirone meat, the man says he always saw the boy as someone special, but he never imagined he had received both a talent and a trial from the gods. Later, the two go out together to shop, and since it is Alan's first time, Gerda commits to teaching him how everything works. He also celebrates the fact that they got lots of meat and didn't need commoners getting in the way of the hunts. Taking the chance, Alan asks the difference between commoners and serfs, and the man explains that the main difference is social status. It's absurd, he says, that commoners don't have to pay 60% in taxes like serfs do. Adult commoners pay 3 gold coins every year, while children pay 1. Alan asks whether there is any way for a serf to become a commoner, and Gerda remembers that it is possible if the person pays 10 gold coins to the feudal lord. Aside from that, the lord may raise a serf's social status as a reward for some service rendered. Hearing this, Alan thinks that his family will soon have another member, so they will need a total of 50 gold coins. Next, the two arrive at a market carrying portions of dried boar and Albahirone meat, and Gerda teaches the boy how he can trade these foods for other products and useful items, such as firewood, salt, or even different kinds of food. That day, the boy discovered that 1 portion of dried meat equals 4 days of firewood, and now that he understands how these trades work, he decides to conduct market research. Over the following days, Alan gradually discovers how certain items are much more expensive than they seem at first glance. For example, the popo fruit, which the vendor wanted to trade 1 for a portion of dried meat. After another day of shopping, the conjurer writes in his notebook that 1 portion of dried Albahirone meat can be exchanged for a bag of salt, 4 mormo fruits, 1 popo fruit, or 4 days of firewood. Beyond that, the following coins share the same value: 1 gold coin, 100 silver coins, 1,000 copper coins, and 10,000 iron coins. A package of dried meat is worth 1 silver coin. So in order to earn 50 gold coins, Alan needs to defeat 500 Albahirones. To prepare for the challenge, the boy goes to a shop and asks whether they sell mana recovery potions. The vendor says he doesn't have anything that expensive, but that customers can always count on healing herbs. Since that's the case, Alan draws in his notebook the medicinal plants used to make potions, and also asks whether the shop sells the Murray's flower. But that is a rarer and more expensive item, so much so that the vendor only had 1 a month ago. When Gerda rushed desperately into the shop and cried for the man to let him take it for 3 gold coins, even though it was worth 5, and even asked to pay later because his friend was seriously injured and might die. Gerda did return and pay later, but the vendor still took the loss. Hearing this, Alan sympathizes with a merchant and gives him a free portion of dried meat. After all, that Murray's flower saved his father's life. The merchant was visibly irritated about the loss he suffered, but was caught off guard by the child's kind gesture. After that, Alan passes in front of a weapon shop and laments the high price of a piece of equipment that cost 5 silver coins. Suddenly, Dagora appears and provokes the boy as always, telling him to get out from in front of his house. At that moment, Alan discovers that this brat is the son of the weapon shop owner, and beside him is one of the village chief's sons, Palomas. Without wanting any trouble, the conjurer simply turns to leave, but Dagora doesn't care and goes after him to start a fight. When he's pushed, Alan evaluates that this guy is clearly a player killer from online games, so even if this fight won't give him experience, he points his wooden sword at the bully to see if he'll keep up that tough attitude. Dagora calls his opponent a coward, while Alan teaches him that the world is not a fair place, but since he's nice, he'll let the axe wielder find whatever junk he wants to use as a weapon. Without delay, Dagora runs off to grab a club to face his archenemy, and the two enter a duel. After a brief exchange of blows, Alan creates some distance and evaluates that, as he imagined, the attacks of an axe warrior are really heavy. But this kid is far from being a Krina-level fighter. As for Dagora, even though he's tired, he doesn't back down and calls his rival forward. so Alan lands a quick strike that sends his club flying into the air, thus easily subduing the axe wielder, who had to swallow his pride and admit defeat. At night, already at home, Alan watches his father change his bandages and say that he's feeling much better. Years later, at Krina's house, to everyone's surprise, Dogora is training with Alan and taking a humiliating beating as always, while Krina lightly trains with Mash, who will have his evaluation ceremony in 2 years. Entering the house after training, Alan sees his younger sister, Mira, who has already been born by this point. In the middle of this, Rodin arrives home with Gerda after the two were called by the village chief for a conversation. According to what was said in that meeting, the amount of boar meat that must be delivered to the feudal lord will increase from 10 to 15, so the commoners will need to join the hunts again. Obviously, the serfs protested, but this was a direct order from the feudal lord, and nothing could be done. If they don't hunt 15 boars this winter, the lord will recruit serfs from another territory, and if more serfs come, there will be less land for each person. Besides that, serfs who don't participate in the hunts may have their lands confiscated. And this wind that's coming could change Krina village forever. Gerda and Rodin tell them that, on top of that, next year the meat delivery will increase from 15 to 20, and that hunters usually work every 10 days. But now they'll have to hunt much more often, seriously increasing the risks involved. In that case, Alan suggests that the serfs allow the commoners to join the hunts, because, as was said, the meat delivery rate will double in a year, and logically the serfs alone won't be able to handle it. Gerda hates the idea because of what happened last time, but the boy, remembering that he possesses the wisdom granted by the creator god Elmia, would like to become responsible for the next hunt to help the newcomers. Thus, a few days later, Rodin, Gerda, and Alan meet with the other members of the group. One of the men comments that Rodin took a while to recover, but he insists he's 100% fine. Another asks if the kid is really going to take part, and the father says that this time they'll adopt Alan's strategy, but that his son will only watch the hunt. The boy, in turn, promises he won't get in anyone's way, even though he'd love to be right in the middle of the action. Of course, his father absolutely didn't allow it, but the most important thing is training the newcomers so no one gets hurt like that again. Speaking of which, the village chief's son, the one who caused the incident with Rodin, asks, "Don't try to protect me if something goes wrong again," and the hunter replies, "Focus entirely on the job." Lastly, Gerda announces that it's time to head out, and as Alan looks past the wooden wall, he thinks about what it was like to leave his village at only 7 years old. Something that feels like a small step in his growth. Far off in the landscape, he spots the White Dragon Mountains, where the boars come down from the summit in autumn to look for food. And legend says there's a mythical white dragon living somewhere on the peak, exactly the kind of story that motivates the boy even more. When they reach the destination, Rodin asks all the hunters to simply stick to what they were trained to do, and then sends everyone to their posts. Some time later, 2 hunters come running out of the forest after luring an enormous boar, and Alan personally feels what it's like to fear such a deadly beast. As the monster charges toward the pair who served as bait, a group of hunters closes in and drives their spears into its body to slow its powerful charge. Then the rest of the men attack the creature's flanks and start making it bleed. In the middle of all this, the boy reflects that everything is going according to plan. The bait team attracted the boar, the tank team managed to hold it back, and the attack team struck at the vital organs. This is the method his father and the others have been using for 10 years without needing great talent to execute it. At that moment, the boy calls for the chief's son to get ready alongside another young man, and he knows it's not a good idea to rely on those 2 skinny kids to tank anything to begin with. Speaking of which, as soon as the pair steps in, Gerda warns, "Don't stick those spears into your comrades," which already shows how little faith they have in the peasants. Either way, they join the attack and drive their weapons into the boar's tough hide. And after the group forces the beast to collapse, the blonde kid declares, "I've just overcome a trial of the gods." Seeing that, the conjurer figures those beginners must have earned some good XP from killing a rank C creature. Curious to see how much he gained, Alan takes out his book and notices he came out empty-handed on this mission, which clearly means that just giving the idea and staying back doesn't grant any experience points. On the other hand, the 2 newcomers approach the boy to thank him, because the way he guided them helped them do a good job, but that doesn't remove the bitter feeling the boy has about this victory. Days later, while he's working at the water well, Alan is asked by a buddy if he'll join today's hunt, and he says he'll watch as always, but asks his companions, Ask my father to let me use a spear this time. The guy answers, not even if you paid me, because Rodden would be furious if they came to him with that talk. Another man, who was listening in, admits he's jealous because he'd love to be part of the hunt. The first man tells him to drop the butcher knife and grab a spear, but the other refuses, saying he won't do that while his wife is pregnant, and that his joy lately has been having meat to cut. Hearing this, the boy gets an idea and asks the butcher for a favor. Right away, he takes the man to his backyard, where several albahirons were hanging with their feathers already removed, and he hoped the man would cut the meat for him in exchange for 2 packages of meat for each bird he processed. While the man examines the animals, Alan thinks about how these albahirons are not part of their food reserves, and that the carcasses need to be separated to sell the meat. After all, the boy needs 50 gold coins to free his family from servitude, but he could never manage that without outsourcing this kind of work. Later, during the hunt, the boy looks at the new members among the rookies and thinks about how they've slowly been adding more people to participate, and soon enough they'll have enough men to form 2 separate groups, thus doubling the number of boars they can hunt. Speaking of which, the conjurer also wonders why the Baron wanted so much more meat, since his territory doesn't seem to be facing any kind of food shortage. Meanwhile, the bait team brings out another boar so the same strategy can be repeated, and the tank team positions itself to stop the beast. Then Gerda orders the rookies to attack from the flanks, and once again the mission succeeds. While everyone celebrates, even Alan allows himself to join in. Since his plan to gain XP actually worked this time, he even leveled up. Earlier, knowing he could summon his monsters within 50 yards, the boy sent Denka straight into the commotion, and just being trampled by the boar was enough for the conjurer to be counted as a participant in the fight. Without a doubt, a masterstroke at least in the boy's mind, even if Denka was sacrificed in the process. 3 months later, the boy reflects on how this world shares Earth's tradition of celebrating the start of each year. And this year he was even invited to the village chief's house for the first time. On the way back, he and Krina celebrate the rewards they earned for meeting the quota of 15 boars delivered. When they arrive home, during a barbecue with both families gathered, the kids comment that the parents should have gone with them, but they say they would hate to start the year having to look at the faces of those stuck-up bourgeois. In any case, Rodden believes they won't have any trouble reaching the goal of 20 hunted boars this year, all thanks to his son's training method for recruiting newcomers. Changing the subject, Gerda asks, "What's in that bottle the brat brought?" And Alan says it's a liqueur the chief gave him as a gift, which immediately gets the 2 grown men excited. Seeing he has hooked his fish, the boy now reels in the line by inviting Mash to another spear training session. Krina asks to join too, but the boy argues that she's already too strong for that, and that the priority is helping Mash evolve because the kid has the talent to become a great lancer. That said, the more confused Rodden and the experienced Gerda became, the more the boy lured them into his trap. He asks, "Is something wrong?" And the 2 comment that the boy doesn't seem willing to hand over that bottle of liqueur. Alan makes it clear that it was a gift he received, so it belongs to him. Now, since he obviously isn't old enough to drink, he agrees to give the drink to the 2 men, but only if they beat him in a small competition. The condition is as follows. If Alan wins, the caster will be allowed to carry a spear during all of this year's hunts, and the contest will be an arm wrestling match. Obviously, knowing they already have it in the bag, his father and his friend accept the offer without thinking twice, and everyone gets into position. With everything ready, before the start of the match, Alan filled his inventory with Fido cards to receive a tremendous attack power buff. So when Krina signals the match to begin, Gerda starts off easily overpowering the boy until suddenly the kid begins to turn the tables with an unreal amount of strength, eventually winning the arm wrestling match. Next, after a short rest, it's time to face his father. When Alan grabs his father's hand, he notices for the first time the number of calluses there, proof of the hard work this man does for his family every day. Rodden, in turn, finds it amazing how much his son has grown to the point of wanting to compete with the old man, and the boy believes that the sooner they treat him like an adult, the better, because he will give his all in everything he does, even at his age. At that moment, Krina announces the start of the contest, and Rodden proves to be a bigger challenge than his friend was. Indeed, the hunter's calluses were not decoration, they were marks that carried the evidence that his livelihood is literally taking down giant beasts. Not by chance, the adult wins the arm wrestling match, and Alan admits he underestimated his father. Handing the liqueur over to the men, the boy reflects that, considering their strength, Gerda's attack stat must be rank D. while his father's must be rank C, which serves as a reference for the boy to understand how strong people who play on normal mode can become. Then, the old man says that his son will only hunt real boars once he wins a contest like this against his father, and the boy gets excited to reach level 4 before autumn. Meanwhile, after devouring all the meat, Gerda tells his wife to bring him more to eat, and when the woman puts the brute in a headlock, the boy assumes Matilda is also rank C, even if she doesn't look like it at first glance. 6 months later, in June, the boy celebrates leveling up. Upon reading what he gained with it, he discovers he is now able to summon rank E creatures, as well as a new type of monster. Imagining he needs to make a fusion to find out what type it is, he sees that his inventory has increased by 10 more slots for new cards, and he also learns that the buffs each summoned creature provides increase with each level gained. So he could beat his father in an arm wrestling match if he used 40 rank E cards. Besides all that, he notices a skill that has no level listed next to it, so he assumes it's a fixed ability. Suddenly, the book turns the page by itself and displays a magical hole so deep that Alan doesn't hear any sound when he throws a stone inside. However, when he puts his hand over the hole, he receives a mental image of the stone and a description of the item, meaning this is some sort of storage. Testing it, he discovers he can store basically anything in there, as long as it fits. Later on, while staring intently at the living room fire, the boy can't get a question out of his mind. If accumulating many items is one of the most important factors for any RPG player, why did he receive a god-level storage so quickly, and right now? After all, any important item, whether a key or a magic carpet, usually comes to you when it is truly necessary, so this must mean something. Anyway, the boy goes out to try his rank E summons. He closes his eyes and commands the summoning of an insect-type creature of that rank, but nothing happens. He then reads in the book that he lacks rank E magic stones to create that monster, since he never needed items to do that before. The boy thinks for a moment about where he can get those things, then remembers he stored in his room, next to his hidden money pouch, some magic stones from the horned rabbits he hunted. He quickly goes to fetch them. Trying once and failing, the boy tests throwing the stones into the magical storage. Then tries a second time and summons the card of a butterfly that gives a +10 resistance and +10 agility buff. However, as soon as he brings the butterfly to life, the boy's mother appears as always, but luckily the insect hides behind him. After giving several nonsensical excuses, the boy manages to send his mother away, and now he is free to enjoy his new summoning card on his own. Next, truth be told, he almost soils his pants when he summons a saber-toothed tiger that has a buff increasing the user's stats by 10, simply double what any rank F monster could do. The boy names the tiger Tama and puts it back into his inventory to try fusing it with the butterfly, but for some reason, it doesn't work. So he throws another magic stone into the storage and tries again, this time managing to create a rank E bird card. That's when the young summoner realizes he'll need a lot of magic stones if he wants to evolve any further. Later that night, during a conversation with the family, Rodden forbids his son from hunting horned rabbits, since they can be dangerous for children. Besides, he has no idea how the kid even managed to get close to those animals, considering he and the men dug a trench around the village a few years ago. That leaves the boy worried about how he's going to get the item he needs so much. The next day, while Krina is beating up Dagora under the excuse of training, Alan asks Pelmoas what he knows about magic stones. Pelmoas explains that they're small, infused gems that monsters have near their hearts, usually used to strengthen or activate magical tools. According to him, there are many different types of these stones in the royal capital. Rank D and C stones are useful to the people there, but rank E stones are basically trash. You can even find them lying on the ground. With that, Pelmoas spots a rank E stone in the backyard and hands it to Alan, who decides to search for more. Sometime later, with the help of his farmer companions, the summoner manages to gather enough stones to create all the rank E cards he was missing. But before he can test his new acquisitions, Alan is caught by surprise when his book suddenly flies into the sky during a strong gust of wind and summons, on its own, a falcon named Hawkins. Right after that, a wild boar bursts out of the woods and knocks the boy down from behind, so a bean-like creature named Beansy is summoned to heal him. Then the butterfly Papillon appears out of nowhere and releases a powder that makes the boar drowsy. With that opening, Tama leaps in, striking the enemy and finishing it off. However, another boar comes rushing at full speed to attack Alan directly, so a literal wall with an eye wall places itself in front of him, serving as a barrier for the beast to crash into and pass out. At that moment, the boy opens his eyes and the wind fades away. He notices that none of his monsters are beside him, which makes him wonder if everything wasn't just a hallucination. Troubled by that thought, he lies down on the grass to reflect, realizing that in this hell mode version of the game, there's no tutorial option, so he has to figure everything out on his own. Convinced that each type of summon has a specific role, he conjures the new cards and observes that insects are good for debuffing enemies. Beasts are highly offensive. Birds are useful for scouting and gathering information. Plant-type monsters work as healers, and stone creatures make excellent defenders. Putting them all together, Alan feels like he has a multifunctional party right in his pocket. And that versatility is what makes the Summoner class so good. It also helps him understand why he received the storage feature at this stage of the game. He wouldn't be able to carry so many magic stones otherwise. With that strength in hand, the boy believes that someday he might become even stronger than the Demon Lord. The next day, Alan, Rodden, and Gerda are at the village chief's house, where he informs them that the Baron will visit the village next month. Just hearing that already irritates Alan, since that's the clown who's demanding 20 boars in a single year. Speaking of which, Deboji explains that the Baron is interested in personally watching the servants hunt. Gerda also gets annoyed, because it's not enough for the man to demand that much meat, now he wants a little show as well. Rodden, for his part, doesn't care much about this, but he doesn't understand why Alan was asked to go along. The chief explains that the boy will be used as a guide for the Baron, and Gerda questions why Deboji doesn't take his own son instead. He replies that Palmoas isn't suitable for that job. In fact, the chief had been hoping Alan would show hospitality to the Baron by hosting a dinner the night before the hunt. At that moment, Alan realizes he's going to be used as a scapegoat to distract that man, and Deboji is trying to win him over with those malmo fruits laid out on the table. Deboji comments that, from what he's heard, the boy has been coming up with several very clever ideas that determined the success of last year's hunts, so he'll certainly be smart enough to do this job. The chief then asks if the kid is okay with that, and Alan immediately thinks to himself how little he personally cares about the Baron, but refusing this service would be stupid. Risking losing the chance to leave his life of servitude, maybe even being forced to hunt like a madman for 10 more years, only to maybe earn the title of commoner someday. After all, there is another way to obtain that ticket to move up in life, since the Baron can grant servants the title of commoner, so Alan accepts serving as his guide. With everything settled, time passes until the day of the important man's visit finally arrives. Surrounded by guards and riding in an impressive carriage, the Baron steps out and is personally welcomed by Chief Deboji, who gives his greetings to Baron Granvelle, thanking them for the warm reception. Granvelle tells his young daughter Cecilia to step down from the carriage. Inside the chief's house, the Baron praises the work the local leader has been doing in Krina village. After all, it's been 15 years since the land recovery decree, and there has been no greater success than within his own domain. He also apologizes for all the fuss regarding the boar meat, because he knows that increasing the required amount will create enormous work for the servants. But he couldn't simply refuse an order from His Majesty. Deboji becomes worried when he hears the king is involved, but Granvelle says the real culprit is Viscount Carnal, that scoundrel who insisted on bringing up the hunting matter while they were standing before the king. Setting that aside, once lunch is served, both the Baron and his daughter fall in love with the flavor of the meat, so he asks what animal it came from. Deboji has no idea, so Alan politely steps in to explain that the meat came from an Albahiron hunted just yesterday, since it is their duty to provide the Baron only the freshest ingredients, along with the best herb seasoning. Impressed by the way the boy speaks, the Baron asks the chief if he is his son, but Deboji answers that he is Rodden's, the hunter. Upon hearing that, Captain Zenoff, who had been accompanying the meal and remembers exactly who they are talking about, also recalls the young boy. Remaining courteous, Alan says he will serve as their guide for tomorrow's hunt. Still intrigued, Granvelle asks if the boy's father once served as a knight, but Deboji explains that Rodden is only a servant. Immediately, Cecilia becomes furious and questions how they could invite a servant to have lunch with the Baron, but the Baron himself scolds the girl and teaches her that even servants are important members of the domain and must not be treated like animals. Cecilia lowers her head and apologizes, but she looks at Alan with a face that says she'll stab him in the back the first chance she gets. In any case, Zinov expects the boy to be able to explain every detail of tomorrow's hunt, and he points out that the goal of 20 boars in a single year is no easy task. If this proves too difficult, his knights can take over the hunts. Honestly, Alan feels a bit offended to see that servants are still so underestimated even today. Meanwhile, Cecilia comments on how excited she is to take part in the hunt and see a really big boar up close, but says it would be even better to see a knight behead one. By the way, Baron Granvelle makes it clear to Alan that once he shows the fundamentals to the knights, they can take on the responsibility of the hunt. Alan replies that 20 boars per year is an insignificant number, and that the servants will have no problem meeting that goal. This leaves Cecilia and Deboji stunned, while the guide promises that tomorrow's performance will convince them. The next day, before they officially leave for the hunt, the Baron instructs the captain to personally take care of his daughter. The group then leaves the village toward the event. Cecilia is more than happy to go along on horseback with the butler Sebas, and the trip goes smoothly until they arrive at the observation tower built by the servants, which will serve as the base from which the nobles will watch the hunt. Once at the top, with exclusive thrones available for both of them, the Baron and his daughter are impressed by the view and by the density of the forest from which the boars emerge. At that moment, when the hunters arrive, Granvelle admits he is surprised to see that they all wear armor, and Alan explains that they made good use of last year's boars, since the armor was made from the animal's fur, bones, and tusks. The boy even thanks Granvelle for granting permission for them to use those parts of the boar. Finally, the hunt begins. 3 hunters enter the forest running, and the Baron asks what they went to do. Alan explains that the objective of that trio is to draw a boar out into the field where the actual hunt will take place. And since speed is essential, they all wear very light armor. Although there are many boars in the forest, the guide asks for patience, since this is a job that can take time. In the middle of all this, Zenov remembers Krina and says that a tutor will be sent the following spring to help the Sword Lord with her studies so she can enter the academy in the next exam. Honestly, Alan can't imagine that girl studying, but he assumes these people know what they're doing. Suddenly, one of the hunters responsible for drawing the prey appears in a rush with the boar right on his heels. Quickly, the tanks move in to box the animal in from the flanks with huge shields which, according to Alan, are made from the hardest part of the boar's hide, the part on its back. Meanwhile, Rodden orders the attack team to advance, followed by the Long Lance team. Alan explains that the Long Lance team is made up of the group's least experienced members, who only joined last year. At the same time, the attack team uses shorter spears, but since they expose themselves more, they wear heavier armor. Then Rodden strikes the beast directly in the neck, which is its most vulnerable spot. After that, Cecilia faints, unable to handle the spectacle. With the success of the event, Zenov comments that these servants may not be knights, but they can certainly be called warriors, and the Baron recognizes the value and skill of these men in battle. With that said, 2 more boars are lured into the kill zone. Zenov then orders Lebrand to be ready to intervene immediately, but Alan assures him there is no reason to panic, since the hunters are trained for this sort of situation. At the same moment, Rodden splits the group in 2 and puts Gerda in charge of the other team. While one boar is pressed between the hide shields, Alan thinks about how the hunters hadn't been able to carry out this task as well for the last 10 years, mainly because of the lack of proper armor and equipment. However, despite the enormous effort, 60% of the meat goes straight to the royal family, while the servants still trade days off to work elsewhere just to secure their basic needs. Obviously, there isn't much money left to invest in equipment, so the best path is to work on effective tactics to increase production and, step by step, obtain the supplies needed to raise the team's level. When the 2 boars are killed, Captain Zenov remarks that now only 17 more are left until the end of the year. But Alan corrects him, saying that in truth, only 10 are left. Everyone looks at the boy in shock as he explains that 7 boars had already been hunted before the lords decided to grace the village with their presence, so it's likely the target will be reached by next month. Because of this, Zenov rules out involving his knights in the hunts, and the boy is grateful, but taking advantage of the Baron's presence, Alan makes 2 humble requests. The first is the construction of 2 more containment shields to increase production. The second is that the hunters need products and goods that are not available in the village, more specifically, liquor. With the Baron's permission, the hunters would like to trade meat for this imported liquor to distribute among the servants, because as production increases and more meat arrives, there is a fear that abundance might reduce the price of this commodity in the village, and exchanging meat for liquor will help prevent an economic downturn. The boy is speaking about this drink in particular because hunters need to risk their lives to be effective, so it's necessary to keep everyone's morale high. Zenoff comments to the Baron that these demands are quite reasonable, so Granvelle grants the request and praises the guide's excellent work. On the other hand, when it's time to leave, Cecilia is not even slightly happy with the attention and recognition Alan received, and she tells the brat not to get too full of himself. She was so angry that she even lost her balance and almost fell off her horse, only being saved at the last second by the butler. In the next scene, Baron Granvelle had requested the presence of Alan, Rodden, and Gerda to personally thank them for the event, as well as to highlight their qualities as hunters. Not only that he gifts both families with a rise in social status, meaning that from now on they will be considered commoners, not servants. Outwardly, Alan tries to hold back his emotions, while inside he is exploding with joy. After all, he has been dreaming of this moment for 8 years. And now that he can hunt outside the village limits, he already imagines paying a visit to the White Dragon Mountains. Moreover, Granvelle will grant the same title to every servant who has taken part in the hunts for at least 10 years. Finally, when reminded by the butler, the Baron says that, by order of His Majesty, Krina village will be used as a positive example for the rest of the kingdom. But first he must tell the king the story of how the hunts in this region began. Alan has no idea how this tradition started. So Gerda, knowing this story, carries some painful memories, for Rodden explains that everything began in the spring, 13 years earlier, when 100 servants from nearby villages were sent to help develop these lands as part of the recovery decree. After 6 months of hard work, they had already made significant progress, until disaster finally struck. A gigantic boar attacked the village, and besides destroying buildings, it devoured most of the potatoes and wheat the people had planted for the winter. Because of the lack of food, most servants decided to explore beyond the borders. But since that wasn't working, Rodden stepped forward and proposed hunting the boars, and that's how the tradition began, out of necessity. At that time, the hunters had no proper weapons or training, but they had no choice but to hunt those beasts by force. Yet of course, such an effort would come with a price. In the process, Rodden lost a good friend and still feels guilty, even though Gerda tries to convince him it wasn't his fault. Hearing this, Alan understands why his father tried to save Deboji's son in that way. Moved by the story, Granvelle grants Rodden one more wish, whatever he wants to ask. Without thinking of anything else, the hunter asks the Baron to take Alan to work on his estate, pointing out the boy's intelligence and the manners he showed during the hunt. When he asks for the butler's opinion, the Baron hears that the child really is quite smart, and that taking him along wouldn't be a problem. At the same time, while everyone agrees, Alan himself is desperate for Granvelle to dismiss the idea, since the boy wants to live a life hunting legendary dragons, and he would have even less freedom working for the Baron. Either way, Granvelle decides that the boy will be his personal servant. Cecilia loses her mind over it and yells that it's disgusting to have a servant in that position, but the butler reminds her that the boy is already a commoner. Desperate, Alan tries to come up with an excuse not to go. However, when he sees his father crying with emotion, the boy changes his mind and commits himself to his new role, promising to serve the Baron with honor. A few days later, Alan's family prepares him to be sent to the Baron's estate, and other servants come to his house to say goodbye, including Krina, who is visibly sad about it. Wanting to cheer up his longtime friend, the boy invites her to one last duel before his departure. So, the two prodigies go head-to-head in a straight brawl, but to everyone's surprise, unlike what has always happened before, the boy is simply overpowering the Sword Lord in the duel. Alan reflects that he used almost all the magic stones he had stored to create 20 copies of Hawkins, giving himself a huge boost in agility. He also thinks about how Krina will leave the village to study at the academy when she turns 12 and will later take on some royal duty, so it's likely that they will never see each other again. At that moment, with a quick and clever maneuver, Alan subdues his rival, who cannot believe she lost. However, the boy declares it a draw, saying the tiebreaker will happen the next time they meet. Innocently, Krina believes she truly didn't lose, and Alan only said that to see the smile she always gives when she's happy. With the duel over, Mash starts crying again because his brother is leaving, while the older boy asks him to be brave and take care of their sister Mila. Then, Matilda and Gerda also say goodbye to him, remembering when he was still the size of his little sister, and now is heading off to such an important job. In the middle of all this, to Alan's surprise, Pelmoas and Dogora were hiding behind the fence, until the chief's son kicks his friend forward, forcing him to approach Alan and give him a dagger. almost annoyed at himself for doing it. Dogora runs back out of the fence and takes a nasty fall, making everyone laugh. After everyone has said their goodbyes, Alan is escorted by his parents to Baron Granvelle, who is already on his way home. On the way, Rodden tells his son that this is only the boy's first step and that he will reach even better places if he works hard. When they arrive, Teresia asks her son to come back home if things start getting too difficult. Then Alan gets into the carriage and feels awkward looking at Granvelle and his daughter, who already doesn't like him much. At the same time, a tear falls from the boy's eye as he looks out the window and watches the gate of his village closing. When he arrived from his trip, Alan was astonished by the size of the mansion where he would now live. However, not everything would be smooth sailing as expected. After all, he was still a servant to the unbearable Cecilia, who never missed an opportunity to take advantage of the poor boy by using him in the most humiliating situations possible, like, for example, making him act as a ladder so she could reach some random fruit at the top of a tree. And as if that weren't enough, after stomping on the boy's shoulders and grabbing the food, the girl thought the bitter taste was awful. So she ordered the servant to go to the market and get something decent for her to eat. As helpful as ever, Alan didn't complain and accepted the task just fine. But his attention was completely stolen when the sky was filled by a gigantic magic ship, something the boy had never seen before in his life. He had heard Pelmoas mention that there were clocks and lamps powered by magic stones, but this was certainly new to him. The next morning, Alan woke up completely refreshed, even though his room looked like a basement piled with dust and spiderwebs. After all, anything was better than the LAN houses where he occasionally passed out in his previous life. Besides, the plants he could conjure had the ability to restore the user's MP while they slept, meaning only advantages. With his stomach growling, the boy went down to the dining hall and found the head servant, a friendly young man named Rickle, with whom Alan had quickly formed a good relationship. Rickle asked whether Alan had been getting along with Miss Cecilia, but the boy's expression alone was enough to show that obviously not, and no one would expect otherwise, knowing that girl. In any case, the head servant explained that Alan wouldn't suffer as much if he were a page, which was a category above servant. In fact, the employees with higher positions in the Baron's family were the butlers, housekeepers, and chief attendants, while those with lower prestige were the cooks, gardeners, and servants like Alan. They were all considered part of the family, but the page was only an occasional helper, so he didn't count as part of it. When he learned that he could be considered part of the Baron's family, Alan understood why his father cried like a child when he was called to work in that mansion. Speaking of that, Alan understood perfectly why the servants received humble meals, but he was quite surprised to serve the nobles food that wasn't much better than theirs. Setting that aside, the Baron's wife praised the boy's improvement as a household worker, and his polite response made the lady's admiration grow even more. The Baron also thought the boy's manners were incredible, especially for someone without a defined talent. Hearing that, Alan imagined that the man had done his homework researching his life. At the same time, Cecilia seemed to have won the lottery, now having yet another reason to humiliate the boy for free, and of course she didn't miss the opportunity to announce that she was a sorceress, a 2-star talent, while her brother Mihai was a swordsman. On the other hand, this subject always made the Baron's third child cry for being the only one in the family without a talent. Their father had already told the girl 1,000 times not to bring it up, so he scolded her again because Thomas couldn't accept that he had to go to the noble school while his brother lived the life he wanted, going to Academy City as a swordsman. Even so, the father reminded him that it was at the noble school that he met the boy's mother and started a family, so he could have a good future there. As if that weren't enough, Cecilia apologized to her brother and gave Alan a dirty look, as if the boy were at fault for the kids crying. After that lunch, Alan had the rest of the day off, so he told the head servant he was going out for a walk. On the street, he discovered a completely new world after leaving the extreme poverty of his village full of servants. Besides, this was a place with a large, well-structured adventurers guild, and of course, the boy couldn't pass up the chance to visit it. Once inside, he asked the receptionist if he could become an adventurer, since his great dream was to hunt dragons in the mountains. However, his dream had to be postponed when he found out that only 12-year-old children could register at the guild, while he was only 8. Refusing to stop at that, no, he went to the mission board to learn a bit more about what it meant to have that profession. Soon, he noticed that the jobs were divided by ranks, where the lowest ones involved weaker monsters like goblins and giant frogs, but the reward was also smaller. Tired of seeing a kid wandering around, an armed adventurer scolded Alan, saying that the place wasn't an amusement park. But since the boy, besides being a conjurer, also had some talent for talking, he ended up getting the man to spill some of the information he wanted. For example, Alan learned that the rank of monsters increased according to their distance from the capital. The farther away, the higher the rank. Some of these monsters didn't even come with information about where they could be found, because they were so abundant that they could literally be found almost anywhere outside the city walls. By the way, Alan saw on one of the posters a Murdergausch, the monster that inspired his brother Mash's name. According to the adventurer, no one had ever hunted this creature because it wasn't just brutally strong, its speed made it a killing machine. So people tended to avoid a confrontation of that level, and ended up leaving it to official knights. Another creature with a poster so old it was almost collecting dust was the White Dragon, since the mountain where it lived was home to several mithril mines, making it an extremely valuable place. For that reason, the reward for defeating that dragon grew day after day and had been doing so for decades. At that moment, 2 women from the adventurer's party called him by the name Raven. After collecting the reward for today's job, they were ready to head for the tavern. After learning several things about monsters, Alan feels ready to put today's plan into practice. So he runs straight to the gate that leads outside the city. The gate is guarded by a soldier who controls who enters and who leaves. When the man asks for a travel permit, Alan shows him a baronial emblem, leaving the guard shocked, since he obviously didn't expect some random kid to be part of the Granville family. In fact, Alan himself had no idea this thing was so important. But if he managed to leave the city so easily, then it seems the emblem has its uses. In any case, the gate is open so the boy can enjoy his day off however he wants outside the walls. The guard warns him about the dangers beyond the city, and about the importance of having someone with him. But Alan looked so excited he didn't even listen, or maybe he just felt so confident that he believed it wouldn't be necessary. As he ran into the forest, he knew he couldn't go too deep, otherwise he'd run into creatures far too strong, so he stayed within a 10-mile radius, where there would only be rank D monsters. At a certain point, he summons a Hawkins and discovers it's a bird capable of following more complex orders thanks to its 150 intelligence. So the boy summons several falcons to track down pockets of monsters around the forest. After that, Alan summons Tama, the saber-toothed tiger, but quickly realizes that the feline's 28 intelligence makes him a little too dim to follow orders well. So he decides to use the animal only at a very specific moment. When a Hawkins alerts him to the presence of creatures in the area, Alan sprints toward the indicated direction and runs right into a group of 5 large goblins. To deal with them, he summons 10 Tamas for the fight, assuming they would be enough to beat down the green monsters, but instead, the goblins turn out to be a much bigger challenge than he expected. To turn around a fight he was clearly losing, Alan summons Papillon, the butterfly capable of releasing sleep powder, gradually putting the goblins to sleep. Aside from that, Alan himself tries to join the fight by throwing rocks, but that doesn't help much at all. Either way, the sleep powder becomes the deciding factor in their victory. And after defeating the 5 goblins, Alan earns 1000 XP, since it's easier to hunt a group of goblins than larger creatures like the boars he faces in his village. The summoner likes this strategy and sends the Hawkins out to look for more monster clusters. And sure enough, Alan continues hunting until nightfall, ending the day having hunted 5 horned rabbits and 80 goblins, totaling 16,000 experience points and gaining 2 levels. Finally, he also discovers that Papillon's debuff has an 80% bonus against goblins, so she will always be extremely useful in this type of hunt. In short, this was without a doubt the best day off of his life, at least until he realized the Hawkins don't see well in the dark and couldn't guide him back home, turning the night into a small nightmare in the middle of a dense, pitch-black forest. 1 month after miraculously finding his way home, Alan uses another day off to buy a few iron balls he can throw during battles, since they will certainly do more damage than the rocks he had been using. After this time, Alan manages to go hunting 4 more times, eventually reaching level 12, and now he's already thinking of upgrading his equipment to tackle harder challenges in the future. However, as soon as he arrives home in the middle of the night, Sebas catches him coming in and calls him to speak with the Baron. In the chief's office, Alan is questioned about the reason behind his endless outings. Or rather, Granville makes it clear that the boy is free to do whatever he wants on his days off, but he is genuinely concerned about the boy's mysterious departures. Spontaneously, and without thinking too much about what he's saying, Alan explains that he's been going out to hunt creatures in the forest around the city. After all, the blood of a legendary hunter runs through his veins, and as they say, like father, like son. The answer seems to sit well with the adults, which greatly eases the situation. As the conversation goes on, things get even better for the boy. Since the Baron's family shows interest in buying the horned rabbit meat, Alan has been hunting, which means one thing. Not only can he keep hunting, but he'll also earn some extra money from it. A huge incentive for his growth, as if Alan needed one. 6 months later, the boy is completely accustomed to his routine, and his strategy continues to improve along with the experience gained through time and practice. However, on a certain day, Alan is alerted by the Hawkins about some threat nearby. So he bolts toward the source of the disturbance and finds none other than Raven and his companions being ambushed by several goblins. One of the women tells Milsai to escape with Raven. The man is gravely injured, so she can take the risk of buying time for the others. But the one who truly steps in to help is Alan himself, armed with his iron balls. Without any summoned creatures beside him, he charges forward with only the projectiles in hand, trying to keep the monsters at a distance, since the balls alone aren't strong enough to kill enemies like these. Seeing the deep cut across Raven's abdomen, Alan still doesn't want to reveal his summons in front of the women, since that would expose his class, so he prepares to jump into action with the dagger Dagora gave him. After coordinating with the frontline girl about who would take which target, the summoner heads into the fight with the confidence of an 8-year-old, except he has so many buffs from his cards that his attack and agility easily surpass 300 points. At this stage, the boy has reached a level where he can defeat rank D creatures without the help of summons. Once the pair finishes off the monsters, the women in the group panic as they try to help Raven. But the priestess doesn't have enough mana points to heal the ally, who is dangerously close to death. Knowing the man wouldn't survive until they got back to the city, Alan offers medicinal herbs to help the adventurer, summoning his book behind his back so the girls won't see it. He takes from his inventory a life leaf he made using Beansy's ability, the Healing Bean. When the leaf is placed over the adventurer's wound, Raven recovers miraculously and gets up in an instant, fully conscious as he recognizes his companions Milsai and Rita. Not satisfied with having healed the man so well, Alan notices an injury on Rita too, and places a life leaf over it, causing instant regeneration and leaving the trio of adventurers stunned by the leaf's spectacular effect. With that done, the boy simply says goodbye and prepares to leave. But Raven, who now sees the kid in a much more respectful way after everything he did, at least wants to reward Alan, since he owes his life to the boy. Afraid that all this talking will ruin his goals for the day, Alan only asks them not to mention him to anyone, and since they offered help, he asks if they can collect rank E magic stones along the way, if possible. After all, ordinary adventurers don't need those stones for anything, but they're extremely valuable for a summoner like him. On the way to his next hunt, Alan reflects on how his father took almost a month to fully recover from his wounds with the Mueller's flower. Yet Raven improved immediately with the life leaf, which leads the boy to the following conclusion. Mueller's restores a certain amount of HP relative to a person's maximum, meaning it's a percentage-based healing item. The leaf, on the other hand, heals a fixed amount of life. He also notices he only gained 80% XP for each goblin he killed. That's because this time it was a group effort, apparently. Putting that aside, Alan summons Hawkins to scold him. After all, the order was that the Falcon should look only for groups of 5 goblins or more, but within a 3-mile radius. On the other hand, the animal's sad reaction when the boy asked if he had been worried about those people made Alan realize Hawkins was intelligent enough to feel empathy, which was a huge revelation for the human, who thought summons existed only to provide buffs and fight. But this shows they're much more than that. Happy with the level of complexity of the creatures created by Elmia, Alan apologizes for how strict he was and thanks Hawkins for being part of his group. In the next scene, poor Alan is once again being used as a step stool by Cecilia at the Baron's mansion, this time to reach a jar on a shelf, where an ingredient she needs to make cookies for her brother Mihai's visit is stored. However, Alan trips and falls along with the girl and the jar. Months later, during a dinner in December, Captain Zenoff praised the tasty meat that had been served at the table. According to Cecilia, it was horned rabbit meat hunted by Alan, and the captain pointed out that he couldn't expect anything less from Rodden's son. Speaking of which, he told Alan that Krina village had reached the goal of 20 giant boars. On the other hand, Thomas grumbled that even with all those boars hunted, his family hadn't received a single one this year, even though horse meat used to be their best dish during winter. Hearing that, Alan wondered if all the boars had been sent to the capital. While Baron Granville told his son not to be selfish, a scolding that certainly left Alan wondering how on earth a servant could be eating better than a baron's own child. Even so, the baron's wife lamented that the end-of-year festivities would lose some of their charm without that special meat. So Thomas asked the servant to hunt a white deer. Cecilia got annoyed because her brother could only give orders to the servant through her, which made Alan think that this girl must believe he's her pet. Their mother considered the request far too difficult, but the young servant assured them he would bring back a white deer, imagining it to be a rank sea creature like a boar, which could give him a good amount of XP. So, once he found time for his new task, the boy finished setting up a pitfall trap in a certain snowy part of the forest. Around that time, Hawkins found what the hunter had been looking for and led him to the white deer which, with its surprising size and ferocity, had wiped out a small group of goblins using its massive antlers. Facing his prey, Alan summoned the hoppers so they could use their taunt ability, gradually guiding the deer in the direction he wanted. The frogs would get close, use the technique to draw the animal toward them, then hop to the next spot and repeat the process. After several rounds of this, they managed to lure the deer into the trap. Alan had prepared a huge hole in the ground that left the animal unable to react. Hours later, the guards at the barony gate shouted that a monster was invading, and soon an entire squad of soldiers rushed to the entrance as fast as possible, armed with spears and clearly tense at the sight of the massive creature approaching Baron Granville's territory. To everyone's surprise, the white deer even seemed to be trying to say something, which was undeniably the strangest part of all. However, Alan crawled out from underneath the creature, complaining about how absurdly heavy the thing was. What he had actually been trying to say from under the deer was that he had brought this gift for Lord Thomas. The entire Baron's family appeared, stunned at what they were seeing, now thrilled to have something special to serve at the end-of-year celebration. As for Alan, he was grateful for the 2,500 experience points he had earned from the hunt. For his part, unable to understand how an 8-year-old could hunt a rank sea monster, Granville refused to believe the boy had no talent. So he ordered Sebas to investigate the matter more deeply. After that, Sebas spoke to Alan privately to announce that he had just been promoted to the position of official hunter of the barony, thanks to his recent displays of talent in this area. According to the butler, a hunter has two duties: hunting monsters to provide food for the family, and rescuing townspeople who are being attacked by creatures. Alan got excited thinking he could work and earn XP at the same time, and even more so when Sebas told him that his new pay would be 100 silver coins, double what he currently earned. Alan realized they preferred to give him a fixed monthly salary rather than paying per hunt, since a single white deer was clearly worth more than 100 silver coins. Still, all he could do was accept the offer, because he would still be able to take some time off to farm more goblins in the forest. On the other hand, he got a bucket of cold water when the butler explained that he would not work every day as a hunter. In fact, he would still continue serving Lady Cecilia, and would only need to act as a hunter once a week or something close to that. A piece of news that left the boy very disappointed. Days later, during the New Year march, Alan and Cecilia watched in awe as the magic ship carrying Mihai, the Baron's promising eldest son, slowly descended. Even though Alan understood that the thing was powered by magic stones, he still couldn't understand how it managed to fly. Cecilia asked Alan not to mention that she had baked cookies for her brother, since it was supposed to be a surprise. When Mihai stepped off the ship, she ran to give him a tight hug, but immediately complained that he had broken his promise to visit her during summer vacation. Mihai behaved calmly and kindly the entire time, and Alan noticed that the two seemed to get along well. Alan imagined Mihai must be around 14, since he was about to enter the academy, though he certainly looked older. He approached to welcome the Baron's eldest son and introduced himself as both hunter and personal servant of the family. So Mihai assumed that a boy so young with two roles like these must have considerable talent. Next, the swordsman gave his sister a souvenir he had bought in the capital, and the girl, overjoyed, pulled him along so he could tell her everything he had been experiencing while they ate cookies. As they left, Alan thought of his own family and hoped Mash and Mila were doing well back home. Sometime later, the hunter returned to his duties by taking down a strangely colored chicken in the forest, wrapping up the day's work. After that, he impressed the head of the family again by bringing the giant frog he had requested, something that would certainly put a big smile on young Mihai's face. Speaking of which, Rickle told Alan that Mihai and Zenoff were dueling at that very moment. In the training arena, the young swordsman faces the captain of the knights in an incredible match. And of course Alan wouldn't miss that for anything in the world, still carrying the animals he hunted on his back. The boy is left open-mouthed when he sees Sir Zenoff wielding a sword for the first time, and Mihai giving quite a hard time to such a revered rival. By the way, once the two finish their duel and Mihai sees that Alan brought 2 heavy animals on his back, he invites him to a match in order to see that strength he shows during his hunts. Since he wants to investigate the servant, Granvelle nods at Zenoff, who hands his sword to the boy. Impressed by the mithril weapon, Alan checks his status and notices they are still oriented toward hunting, but after rising from level 13 to 20 because of his new job, he imagines he might be able to win this match, even though he hasn't practiced since leaving Krina. So the fight against Mihai begins, and Alan advances cautiously so he won't injure his opponent. However, the conjurer is caught off guard when the swordsman easily blocks his strike and retaliates with an extremely fast and powerful sequence of sword attacks. Knowing he will lose if he stays only on the defensive, Alan strikes back by dodging and attempting an attack. But Mihai is clever and manages to dodge with ease. From that moment on, the conjurer feels this duel will be much harder than he expected. Mihai's mother becomes worried for her son, but Zenoff reminds her that the boy spent the whole year training at the renowned city academy, so there's no chance he will lose this match. Indeed, Mihai disarms Alan and ends the fight. And then his siblings run over to praise the swordsman and ask how he became so strong. Mihai explains that he conquered a dungeon in the summer, otherwise he would have been expelled. Cecilia now understands why he couldn't visit during the summer, and Alan is impressed by the life this guy must have at the academy. Mihai adds that being at the academy is difficult, but it's worth it when he gets the chance to train with Diverg, the Sword Lord. Alan reflects that this guy trains with Sword Lords and conquers dungeons, in addition to progressing 100 times faster than him because he is in normal mode. So he assumes this is the level of strength someone can reach after dedicating an entire year to rigorous training. With that in mind, the servant asks the swordsman to duel with him again when he visits the family next time, and Mihai agrees, as long as the boy takes care of Cecilia while he's away. Alan shakes his hand, but deep down he knows he only wants to raise his rank and stop being this lousy girl's servant as soon as possible. A few days later, Mihai leaves the barony to return to his duties at the city academy, the place where Krina, Dogora, and Cecilia will also go one day. In April of that year, a viscount named Carnal visits Granvelle. During a conversation at the dinner table, the Baron seemed uncomfortable with the man's presence. At one point, Alan serves the viscount a piece of meat and remembers when Rickle told him that this man rules the neighboring fief on the other side of the White Dragon Mountains, and that his title is one step above Baron. According to what the head servant heard, Carnal took a magical ship just to come from the royal capital to Granvelle's barony for some unknown reason, which is strange, since the Granvelles and the Carnals have had a strong feud for centuries. Upon tasting the food, Carnal enthusiastically comments that this must be the famous boar meat he heard so much about. Granvelle asks Alan to confirm, which he does, but both know this is just horned rabbit meat, since they wouldn't waste their best food on this fool. Alan knows how much Granvelle despises the Viscount, since this is the guy who drew the king's attention to the boar hunts, which was probably the factor that made the crown demand all the meat for itself. Now Carnal leaves his fief only to stuff himself in the neighboring territory. It seems, between one fief and the other, the White Dragon Mountains are full of mithril, with multiple mines belonging to each territory. But since the White Dragon made its nest on Granvelle's side, the Baron can no longer access the mithril, which has caused a major economic problem. However, the dragon does not stay in only one place, so approximately every 100 years, it usually moves to the other territory. In other words, in the past century, it was Carnal's fief that had been going through this problem. After taking a sip from his cup, Granvelle asks the reason for the Viscount's visit, and he tells them that a few days ago, his youngest daughter participated in the appraisal ceremony, so he came to share the result. Hearing this, Alan hopes his brother Mash discovered a great talent, since he was always good with the spear. Now, regarding his daughter, Carnal says that fortunately she does not possess any talent. Then the Viscount starts laughing and the Baron becomes visibly irritated, reactions Alan does not understand. Provoking his rival, Carnal sarcastically laments that 2 of the Baron's 3 children possess a talent. So Granvelle reminds him that the Viscount's eldest son also had one, and that this doesn't change the fact that nobles like them must fulfill their duties. Alan becomes increasingly confused, since discovering a talent is a reason to celebrate when a servant discovers theirs. But nobles seem to have some serious problem with it. and the Viscount apparently came all the way from the Oak House just to rub in the Baron's face that his daughter has no talent at all. Months later, at the beginning of October, on one of Alan's days off, the boy is at a table with his adventurer friends to tell them he was thinking of hunting a little farther from the city this time. So he would like them to give him some tips on how to hunt rank C monsters. Of course, the kid didn't tell anyone this, but the truth is he has already killed around 10,000 goblins, so there shouldn't be any left nearby, and rank D monsters no longer fill his stomach. Before anything else, Rita takes the boy to a weapon shop so he can strengthen his equipment, since she intends to raise the level of their hunts. Because Alan had said he wanted something that wouldn't restrict his movements, the woman first tries a stylish pink skirt on him. But Milsize seems to have a better idea and recommends a red cape with a spider web symbol. Some time later, wearing that cape out in a field, Alan is now concerned about getting a new weapon. But only after he hunts a rank C monster. His enhancement skill is at level 5, which basically doubles the buff status of his summoned creatures, and he's eager to test his capabilities. When Hawkins appears after finding a creature, Alan is taken to an orc who is sleeping like an angel with a spear in his hand. Without wasting time, he summons an entire group of Tamas to take down the monster. For a moment, it looked like the orc might be able to react against all those giant felines, but the fight quickly turned out to be just as easy as expected, and after defeating the enemy, the summoner earned 1500 XP, along with the joy of discovering that he no longer needed to hunt rank C monsters using traps. On the other hand, the boy tries to stay humble, since he still has a long road ahead before reaching Mihai's strength. Right after that, Hawkins reports the location of another rank C monster, this time an armored ant. Alan remembers that Raven almost died when he was surrounded by a group of these creatures, so he stays alert for the challenge. The summoner sends his battalion of Tamas, but their claws can't break through the ant's armor, and the insect easily defeats the feline. So Alan sends 2 Papillons to put the enemy to sleep, which ends up working. But when the boy climbed onto the ant's belly to tear out its magic stone, its shell was far too tough to be pierced by his dagger. Still, the scare he got when the creature woke up, along with the fear of dying, made him manage to kill it in desperation and earn 3000 XP. Even so, the ant's belly wouldn't open no matter what. So Alan considers the possibility of using magic against its armor, since his intelligence is so high. In the next scene, Cecilia asks whether Alan really wants this 1-year gift of servitude, and he confirms that he does. With a teacher available to him, the boy wants to know whether he has any aptitude for casting spells. Cecilia points out that it's impossible without a talent, but when the mage places a crystal ball on the table to test the boy's capability, Alan doesn't think twice and places both hands around the sphere to find out whether he has what it takes to become a sorcerer. However, the magical object doesn't respond to his presence, which makes him believe that all those intelligence points are useless. The next day, during the Granville family's lunch, the Baron is informed that a Murdergausch is heading straight for the city. According to Rickle, this information came directly from the guards, who said the creature would reach the south gate in less than 2 hours. Granville asks about Captain Zenoff and is told by the butler that the officer and his forces are on a hunting mission and won't return for 2 days. Because of that, Granville orders the Adventurers Guild to be called in to protect the city and evacuate the citizens. Alan offers to help drive the Murdergausch away, but Cecilia retorts that this monster isn't just any challenge for a kid trying to act like a hero, especially since he is her servant and can't leave his post whenever he feels like it. However, Alan responds that he has a role above being a personal servant, because he is also a hunter of the Granville family, and that answer shuts Cecilia up completely. As he heads toward the Murdergausch while the population runs in the opposite direction, the boy thinks about the fact that this is a rank B creature that not even the adventurers of this city have ever dared to face. On top of that, Alan spent all his MP this morning farming XP, so he needs to recover first if he wants a chance. As he picks up speed, the guards order the gate to be closed, but a man begs for help to rescue his wife and daughter who are trapped in a carriage outside. At that moment, Alan finally sees the Murdergausch in person for the first time, and the monster is about to devour the 2 women inside the vehicle right beside it. Showing tremendous courage, Alan takes an iron ball from his inventory and throws it into the creature's left eye, causing massive damage and preventing it from using that eye for now. The guards and adventurers warn the kid that this is not a game, but besides knowing perfectly well how serious the situation is, Alan still taunts the beast with insults and another throw. His idea is to get the Murdergausch's attention and lure it to White Dragon Mountain. and the bait is simply himself. Definitely a courageous act the Granville barony will never forget. In fact, the one who can't forget what he's doing is Alan himself, unless he wants to become troglodyte food. Looking at his status book, he notices his mana points are still at 0, which means things are about to get bad. After dodging a punch while fleeing and rolling across the ground, the boy finds himself sitting in front of a smiling Murdergausch. In reality, it's obvious the monster is playing with a human, since one of its traits is being as evil as it is sadistic. On the other hand, the player's MP has just filled back up, so now he has a chance. First, Alan deletes all copies of the beans and tamas to create 34 copies of Papillon, stacking a total of 36 to gain a huge bonus to agility and endurance, giving him the speed and stamina to keep serving as bait. And sure enough, Alan starts running again while drawing the Murdergausch right behind him. Now that he's far from the city, he doesn't need to worry about revealing his cards, so he casts 3 Papillons to make the monsters sleep. Seeing that it had no effect, Alan summons 3 more, but the Murdergausch stays wide awake and destroys the butterflies, and even looks angrier. Time passes, the sun slowly sets, and Alan begins to show fatigue in the middle of the forest. However, one advantage of having gone deep into the woods is being able to use the trees to hide. After managing to shake off the giant and buy some time, Alan still needs to rack his brain to figure out how to bring that beast down. After all, the sleep debuff he tried didn't work at all, which is a terrible sign. And everyone knows defeating a Murdergausch without weakening it is impossible. Still, satisfied that at least he managed to pull the monster away from the city, Alan puts on his cloak and decides to go home, only to be surprised by the Murdergausch, which found him among the trees and forces the poor boy to keep running, as if there were no tomorrow. And speaking of tomorrow, 3 days go by before young Alan appears exhausted at Granville's gate. After being carried inside when he collapses at the entrance, he is placed in a bed to rest. And as soon as he wakes up, he finds Cecilia worried about him and happy to see the boy awake, yet furious that her servant made her worry so much. Beside her, Sebas asks if the boy remembers anything, and he explains that he was chased by the Murdergausch for 3 days while trying to return to the city. Seeing that the boy is at least functional, the butler sends him to report the details to the Baron. When brought before Granville, Alan regrets that he wasn't strong enough to defeat the Murdergausch, so he did what he could to lead it away from the city. Captain Zenoff emphasizes that he and his knights are responsible for defending the city, but the boy handled things alone to prevent a tragedy in their absence. Acknowledging the heroic deed, the Baron rewards the young hunter with 10 gold coins from the Granville family and another 10 gold coins from the family that was inside the carriage at the gate and whom Alan saved. With eyes shining, the kid goes crazy thinking about buying his first mithril sword, while Granville asks him not to go so far from the city on his future hunts. Sometime later, Alan is on another day of work, now with his long-dreamed of mithril sword in hand, cutting through dangerous monsters as if they were butter. For 25 gold coins, he now had an extremely powerful tool that would take his hunts to a new level. For example, even though the blade still couldn't pierce the armored insect's shell, at least it could break through its weaker underside, giving access to the valuable magic stone the monster carried. Next, from the 3 Hawkins that Alan had placed in the sky, he kept one flying, stored another in his inventory, and left the third to answer a question. Then he took Malmo fruit, jerky, and sweet potatoes from his inventory, placed one of these items inside a bag, and asked the bird which item he had hidden. Hawkin taps its beak against a fruit on the ground, hitting exactly the item that was inside the bag. To test what he had wanted from the beginning, Alan now brings back the falcon he had stored, and asks it what item is inside the sack. When the second bird also gets it right, the Malmo fruit, the player calls the third one that was flying above and asks the same question, but it has no idea what it is. To prove his theory once and for all, the boy summons a 4th Hawkin and repeats the question, and this creature hits the item inside the sack as well. Next, Alan summons a Papo, a bird with high intelligence, and once again asks which of the 3 items is inside the sack. However, the Papo doesn't know the answer, so the summoner concludes his experiment and reaches the following conclusion. Summoned creatures can synchronize and update any new information they receive, but this is limited to recently summoned copies, and copies that were already summoned before cannot synchronize information with the others. Besides that, only copies of the same species can synchronize, which is why Papo didn't know the answer. In this case, the Hawkin, for example, are able to stay updated and informed even if some of their copies are killed. In short, as long as the summoner remains alive, summoned creatures are basically immortal and have unlimited potential. Sometime later, around mid-March, when Alan is 9 years old, he once again meets the talented Mihai for a new duel after the summoner has evolved his abilities a bit more. However, even though Alan is level 28 and has been able to hunt hundreds of rank C creatures, he is still inferior to his rival, to the point that the swordsman disarms the hunter rather easily and ends the fight. Trying to contain his frustration, the loser would love to know what kind of food they give those academy students. Mihai, humble and kind as always, congratulates his friend and admits that the challenge was formidable this time, although Alan believes he gave him more trouble last year. Either way, the Baron's older brother is astonished to hear during lunch that this servant faced a Murdergalsh alone. Thomas asks whether his brother could defeat that monster, and Mihai readily admits he would have no chance against a rank B enemy. In the middle of this, a soldier rushes into the dining hall to inform the Baron that the white dragon has migrated. Hearing that, all Alan can think about is that this dragon is a monster with 1,000 gold coin reward. While everyone in the room becomes extremely agitated, the soldier reports that the winged creature has left its nest within the Granville barony and is now heading to carnal territory. There couldn't have been better news for the Baron, who can now resume mithril extraction in the mountains after a century of the white dragon occupying his land, which prevented mining operations. From today on, Granville will be able to recover its people's former glory with a new financial boom. But before anything else, Captain Zenoff recommends locating the dragon's nest before returning to the 4 mithril mines, knowing that they will also need to eliminate the monsters that exist along the path from the city to the mines. Mihai can't wait to join his father's warriors, but Zenoff rejects that possibility immediately, since it would be disastrous if the white dragon suddenly appeared while the Baron's son was in the middle of the chaos. Besides, the base of the mountains is filled with extremely high-rank creatures, and it would take months before they could cross that area. Mihai's mother reinforces that her son should continue focusing on his studies, which he accepts without complaining, promising to return next year. Alan, on the other hand, wants nothing more than to complain about the situation, since he will have no chance to gain more XP if all the surrounding monsters are wiped out. To prevent that from happening, he needs a plan. The next day, he goes far away from the city with his mana points at maximum, after raising his conjuration level to 5 and his expansion level to 4, and after acquiring the sharing skill. For him, it is quite an achievement, since it took him 2 years just to raise conjuration from level 1 to 2. In any case, it's true that he now needs 30 million experience points to level up, but there's no point complaining when the player himself chose Hell mode. Checking his expansion skill, Alan gained 10 more card slots in his inventory, totaling 50 in other words, even more stacking buffs. Besides that, he summons a Hawken to test his new sharing ability. When he tells the Falcon to use the skill, he begins to see himself through the bird's eyes, that is, he is sharing the same vision through one eye, meaning Alan can use one eye for his own vision and the other to see what Hawken sees. When he orders the Falcon to fly high, the summoner is left speechless as he watches the rest of the continent in a panoramic view, including the White Dragon's mountain he so badly wants to reach one day. As if that weren't enough, he can also communicate telepathically with his summon, adjusting its flight path like a drone, and even share its special ability, Eagle Eye, which allows him to see miles away. Now, since it's a complex power, Alan wonders how many monsters he can share his vision with at once. Trying to act like a walking security room with several flying cameras at his disposal, he summons 3 more Hawkens and 2 Tamas, and discovers that he can see what all of them see at the same time, but at a price. With the overload caused by the last summon, Alan's head feels like it's about to explode. So he cancels the sharing skill and realizes the limit is probably 5. Considering sharing is a skill that doesn't level up, he finds it a bit strange that the limit is so low, especially now that he can summon up to 50 creatures at once, so there may be some attribute requirement needed to increase that limit. Imagining that the attribute in question was intelligence, Alan checks his current stats and sees that his intelligence now totals 1 in 111 with all the buffs. So he guesses he might be able to share vision with 1 extra monster for every 200 points in that attribute. After reaching that conclusion, he creates a new creature, the rank D Hollow Bird, which grants a plus 20 bonus to agility and intelligence. By creating 6 more copies of the same card, his intelligence rises to 1 in 251. To test his theory, he activates vision sharing with 6 monsters at the same time, and this time, he doesn't suffer the terrible headache. That confirms he was right. The key is his intelligence stat. Alan finally understands why the game's developers gave summoners such high intelligence. Eager to see which rank D monsters he still hadn't created, he summons the remaining 5 creatures. With the exception of Tattertot, all of them have more than 100 intelligence, which likely means they can understand what the summoner says. Combining that with his ability to share vision, Alan has a brilliant idea. He can use his own summons to hunt monsters and farm XP. Without wasting time, he tests Spidey the spider and its extremely sticky web against an armored ant. Once the ant is immobilized, Teddy the bear charges in and smashes through its shell with its fangs. Then Brawn the knight steps forward, using his huge shield to tank the enemy's counterattacks, and Fillet the fish is launched to provide a powerful buff to the whole team, giving them the strength needed to defeat several armored ants. After the fight, Alan still hasn't used Tattertot for obvious reasons, since the creature looks like a potato with leukemia, but mainly because its role seems to be restoring the summoner's MP, which the name itself suggests. To confirm this, the boy uses the monster's special ability, Magic Sprout, and it does, in fact, restore his mana back to full. Then, since he hadn't used the Hollow either, Alan figures that, with its night vision, it must be the opposite of Hawken, helping reveal enemies at night instead of during the morning. Putting all the pieces together, the player builds his combat strategy. Hawken and Hollow will be the eyes that identify opponents from afar. Fillet will provide the evasion buff, Spidey will immobilize the targets, and Teddy will follow up to break everything apart. With that setup, the human won't even need to take risks to gain XP from now on. And since Fillet's buff raises his intelligence to 1,600, Alan can share vision with 8 summons without any issues, so it won't hurt to use a few more Teddys on the front line. After ordering all his monsters not to attack adventurers, even if they are attacked, Alan continues his journey with the confidence of someone who sees a promising future ahead. Speaking of the future, he looks toward the distant White Dragon Mountain and thinks of a new way to use his vision-sharing skill. Meanwhile, in Krina Village, while Krina and Dogora duel on a beautiful afternoon, Mash notices a strange bird with one eye consumed by a red flame. The same bird crosses the field and finds Rodden, who is working the land, and then flies to the family's house, where Teresia is fixing Nula's hair. Suddenly, the woman notices a gold coin left exactly where the bird had been. Alan's way of helping the people he loves most without having to be there in person. 6 months later, in October of that same year, Captain Zenoff returns from a long reconnaissance mission to discover the true state of the mines after so much time without being used. Unfortunately, because of that, the entire region is now infested with monsters, including the mithril refineries, which will also need to be reclaimed from the hordes of goblins and orcs that dominate the territory in minimally organized tribes. In other words, it will not be an easy task. For that reason, Zenoff believes he will need 3 years to completely clear the land and make the mines operational again. That lengthy timeframe is enough to make Baron Granvel's hair stand on end. After all, they have gone so long without access to the mines that his territory is in clear decline. Moreover, as is already known, Viscount Carnal did not take the arrival of the White Dragon in his territory well, going as far as openly challenging the creature in order to maintain his mithril extraction. However, both the miners and the Viscount's resistance forces are being wiped out and turned to dust in the blink of an eye. If Carnal continues with this stubbornness and refuses to let go, it may spill over into Granvel's territory, since their neighbors have grown stronger due to the thriving economy of recent years and could plan an invasion. Meanwhile, Alan gains 15,000 experience points while clearing the lunch dishes, since his summons are doing the dirty work during his shift. Speaking of which, the boy has spent the last 6 months at full throttle, and when he turns 12, he plans to leave the Granvels to become an adventurer. With 2 years remaining until then, the ideal course of action would be to help them eliminate the monsters controlling the mines in order to gain prestige and XP. Sometime later, Alan heads to a goblin tribe, the kind of place where, back when he used to play RPGs, he would simply kill the monsters but not destroy their spawn point, so he could farm an absurd amount of experience points. However, besides standing in the way of the mines, this tribe feeds on human beings and has been causing complete chaos. Therefore, it is time for them to be entirely annihilated, and that is precisely why the summoner is there. With his bears, he is capable of putting up a strong frontline fight, while his spiders are extremely useful with their webs, which are fired from a distance and can neutralize enemy archers. Faced with such an overwhelming beating, the goblins attempt to flee, but the summoner knows exactly what he is doing and has already blocked the only possible exit, cornering the monsters once and for all. As his tribe approaches destruction, the Goblin King appears with his crown and his size larger than average. But none of that is enough to intimidate the teddies. The advantage is so great that the supreme leader of the enemies is nothing more than just another challenge. After finishing off the tribe, Alan gains nearly 9,000 experience points. His next step is to advance toward the territory that is currently controlled by the goblins. But at some point he will reach the orcs' domain, and that is where things will truly get serious. Sometime later, during the New Year's march, Mihai lands in Granvelle to visit the family as always. However, instead of his characteristic smile, the young swordsman seems shaken for some reason, even though he has just graduated from the academy. Like in the old days, he invites Alan to a duel, the kind of fight the summoner can hardly wait for, since it is truly challenging and a real way to test his potential. By this point, everyone in the family has noticed that Mihai seems stranger than usual, everyone except Alan. Perhaps because of his excitement to face such a powerful rival. Now that he is 10 years old, Alan no longer has age restrictions on his stats, which means he can now accumulate 100% of the buffs from his cards. With 30 copies of Spidey and 20 of Teddy, the boy is at his peak and believes this is finally his chance to defeat the opponent who has been stuck in his throat for so long. However, when the duel truly begins, Alan gradually realizes that not even his buffs are capable of making him faster than Mihai Granvelle, no matter how hard he tries. Moreover, each blow from his opponent feels like being struck by a different brick, delivered with a power the young hunter simply cannot withstand. After a brief exchange of sword strikes, Mihai disarms Alan and wins the match without much difficulty, unable to believe how easily he was defeated. The servant considers lowering his strength buffs to increase his speed and surpass Mihai in that regard, but if he barely managed to block with his current strength, imagine if he reduced that attribute even further. In any case, as always, the Baron's son is extremely kind with his words and praises his opponent's performance. However, his strange behavior returns when he does not even greet Alan properly and goes straight to his parents to deliver the terrible news. Cecilia and Thomas were very happy about the arrival of the brother so dearly loved by everyone. But after informing their parents, Mihai tells the boys that he will have to carry out the duty of the nobles, a service he cannot even speak about. To make matters worse, he must depart tomorrow and will only return home after 3 years. Upon hearing this, Alan immediately remembers when Carnal provoked Granvelle for having 2 talented sons. Now he understands that, from that perspective, it truly is a problem, because nobles with a gift must submit to this so-called duty of the nobles. The next day, at Mihai's departure, the entire family is visibly shaken, while the swordsman tries to maintain an upright posture. Before boarding the carriage that will take him away, the Baron's eldest son asks Alan to take care of his sister, Cecilia. When he receives a hug from Mihai, the summoner feels that he is trembling. Another 6 months pass, and now it is May of this year. After freeing the entire territory from the goblins, Alan now stands before his greatest challenge, the orc tribe that must be exterminated. At level 35, the boy is capable of summoning a true army. So he uses that ability to advance against the tribe and begin a large-scale battle. Using Braun as his shield, the summoner remains beside his troops and shows confidence in victory. However, despite his level being reasonably high, he still cannot see how much HP his summons have. In other words, they simply disappear after taking a large amount of damage, which is a considerable problem from a strategic point of view. In any case, what he had at his disposal was enough to defeat the guards at the entrance and invade the enemy camp. At that same moment, hundreds of orcs armed with spears attack Alan's forces, who respond well and prove capable of defeating the enemies, even though they are much stronger than the goblins. In the meantime, the boy sees a spell falling from the sky that almost hits him, if not for Braun's protection. To the summoner's surprise, the orcs had some sorcerers in their ranks providing long-range defense, which caused terrible damage to his bears, who were busy dealing with the spearmen. Because of this, Alan personally takes an iron ball from his inventory and hits a mage directly. However, when they see one of their companions struck down, the other monsters hide to get out of the human sight and continue casting spells at the teddies. As if that were not enough, one of the sorcerers alerts the leader about the arrival of invaders. By this point, the orcs had already mobilized an army for battle, and Alan realizes once and for all that he will need to use his full capacity if he wants to leave this confrontation alive. With a large number of D-rank magic stones, he can summon more than 20,000 copies of Teddy if necessary, in addition to having more than 100 items to recover mana points. Therefore, he orders his bears to continue the attack and feels that the battle is favorable to him until the Orc King appears in the eye of the storm with a huge leap to turn the tide. 2 bears attack the giant, but they are easily defeated by a single axe strike. Seeing that this opponent will not be easy, Alan spams several teddies at him. But regardless of how many there are, one by one the bears fall, while the summoner spends an absurd amount of MP. To make matters worse, one of the mages casts a spell that destroys the pair of bronze the boy had protecting him, leaving him completely vulnerable to the next attack. When he sees another spell coming toward him, Alan orders 2 bears to stand in front of him. They do so, preventing their master from likely dying, but not preventing him from being thrown forcefully miles away until he crashes back first into a pile of crates. After recovering part of his HP with an item, the boy looks at the battlefield and finds himself in a terrible dilemma. His bears can handle the orc infantry, but the mages are causing immense damage, and the Orc King seems simply untouchable on the battlefield. Thoughtful, the invader begins to lose hope until Captain Xenoph suddenly appears, leaving the boy stunned, since theoretically the barony's soldiers were only supposed to reach this tribe tomorrow or the day after. However, Xenoph explains that the smoke coming from the area made him want to investigate, and it seems it was not in vain. He draws his sword and goes to face the Orc King. Embarrassed, Alan dismisses all his summons and is bothered by the fact that the captain does not even mention it. Xenoph declares that he will take care of the enemy leader, while Vice Captain Leibrand should deal with the rest of the rabble. That said, the captain defends the giant's attacks as if they were child's blows, and Alan is left astonished. According to Leibrand, due to his overwhelming strength on the battlefield, Xenoph earned the nickname War Demon, and certainly not without reason. Soon, the vice captain joins the battle and spots the mages in the rear. With an incredible leap, he positions himself among hundreds of enemy spearmen and releases a power that Alan notices resembles Krina's special ability. Even in the middle of the chaos, the knight directs his power toward the mages and manages to hit the first one directly, leaving only the last. The infantry tries to reach him, but as Alan realizes, the vice captain is as overpowered as his superior. He is completely surrounded by seemingly endless orcs and does not suffer even a scratch while taking down several at a time. And to think he was defeated by Krina that day. At the same time, Xenoph avoids a heavy attack from the Orc King and, after leaping into the sky to an unbelievable height, returns to the ground with a vertical strike that cuts his rival in half, opening the monster as if it were a walnut shell. In disbelief, Alan does not understand how the man killed a rank B monster so easily without even using his special ability. After the victory, the captains take the young hunter from the barony to eat at the camp set up in the middle of the forest. During the meal, after being pressured, Alan admits that he was the one who destroyed the goblin tribes along the way, confirming Xenoph's suspicion. After the boy became a hunter, Xenoph had heard several reports about piles of goblins being left throughout the forest, in addition to knowing that Alan had been able to hunt a white deer alone and also confront Mihai Granval. Furthermore, Alan also had to admit that those summons were controlled by him, but he is careful not to reveal anything about his agreement with the god of creation. In any case, Xenoph explains that Granval already knew the boy had great talent, which is why he promoted him to official family hunter. Alan had already imagined as much. After all, it is not common for a child his age to receive so much freedom and responsibility. In any case, after asking a servant to clean his wounds, Xenoph promises to keep what he saw today a secret, as long as the boy keeps him informed about his next hunts and battles. While wiping his superior's back, the boy cannot help but notice the enormous scar that, in his mind, seems impossible to have recovered from. But surprisingly, the captain is still in excellent condition. 2 weeks later, the hunter continues his cleansing journey and has just defeated another orc camp along the way. As a strategy, he first attacked quickly from all sides with 40 teddies, preventing them from forming ranks to strengthen their resistance. Now that he knew about the mages, the summoner sent his spiders to eliminate them as quickly as possible. This made the confrontation against the orc camp much easier and earned him 335,000 experience points, simply 7 times more than an entire goblin tribe. After failing in the previous battle, Alan, proud of himself, learned how to deal with the enemies he had encountered and developed an effective tactic to eliminate risk and secure victory. In September, royal messengers arrived at the Granval barony to deliver a letter to the Baron one that would change the entire family forever. While carrying out his mission, to which he remained loyal until the very end, Mihai unfortunately lost his life. Furious, Granvelle questioned how the hell this could have happened in just 6 months, then accused his superiors of having used Mihai as cannon fodder because of the family's low noble status. The messenger asked whether that was the accusation he wished to bring before the king, which made the baron swallow hard. The visitors then left, leaving the Granvelles in their grief. At that very moment, Alan remembered the strange way Mihai had been acting that day, trembling and asking the hunter to take care of his sister, as if he had known he was going to die. In turn, Granvelle ordered the servant to leave the room so he could speak with his family. But for some reason he also asked Thomas to step outside, leaving only Cecilia and his wife inside. Outside, Alan witnessed the general commotion among the household servants, who were crying over the death of the dearly loved Mihai Granvelle, until he heard Cecilia shouting from inside the room that her father had known her brother was going to die. Inside, the Baron was telling the girl that this was a duty nobles were required to fulfill, and this shook Cecilia so deeply that she refused to listen any further and ran out in tears. The next day, during lunch in the dining hall, Alan and Rickle talked about how Cecilia had not left her room since the day before. According to the head servant, the Baron had already lost his parents and his older brother both at a very young age because of this duty of the nobles. Suddenly, the two heard shouting that Cecilia had disappeared after escaping through her window using tied bedsheets. Without wasting any time, Alan hurried to find the girl, wherever she might be. Hours later, in the middle of the night, Cecilia is so tired that she can barely walk properly anymore. Filled with sorrow, she laments her brother's death as she remembers the letter he sent, in which he said he would be assigned to a complicated mission that he felt he would not return from alive. In the meantime, an owl with glowing eyes watches the girl's every movement, until Alan appears after discovering his mistress's location through one of his summons. She asks whether the boy came to take her back home, and he replies that his job is always to serve Cecilia, not to give her orders. Since that is the case, she tells him to go home. However, taking advantage of the fact that her stomach has just growled, the servant secretly takes a malmo fruit from his inventory and offers it along with some bread and a drink, delighting his mistress, who does not make a fuss about eating the food. As she eats, she cries and tries to convince him that something just got into her eye. At the same time, she vents to him, asking whether Mihai was truly strong. Alan recalls that he never managed to defeat him, and that comment alone makes the girl cry even more. She remembers when Mihai wrote in the letter that even the thought of dying terrified him, and that all he wanted was to return home to his family. With that in mind, Cecilia says that she will die as well. She simply knows it. Soon, Alan invites his mistress to leave with him on a journey around the world and leave the city behind. But the young noble would have to forget her family. Cecilia replies that this is madness, so Alan suggests that they wait until next year, when they will be able to register as adventurers at the age of 12. As for the academy her father always talks about, she can simply choose not to go. After all, it is only a school, and Cecilia should decide how she wants to live her own life. He then asks what she wants to do with her life. Immediately, she remembers her brother's words from the day he said he did not do everything in the name of the people or his family, but because he chose to be there. At that moment, she says she wants to go home, but first she asks the servant to carry her, since her legs are hurting. And so, Alan carries his mistress on his back through the dark streets of the barony of Granvelle. Beneath the starry sky, she thanks him. Later, the young noble is returned to her parents, who, moved with emotion, run to embrace their daughter. She apologizes for having run away, but Granvelle tells her not to worry about anything, because soon they will be extracting mithril again, and may be able to obtain an exemption for Cecilia from the duty of nobles by granting the royal family rights over the mines. With that said, Cecilia puts on the hair ornament given to her by her brother and states that she, as a member of House Granvelle, will fulfill her obligation to serve the duty of nobles. She remembers when Mihai wrote that the only reason he went on that mission was to overcome his weaknesses, and now she wants to follow in her brother's footsteps. 6 months later, in March of that year, Alan feels satisfied as he opens the chest of a gigantic monster and removes its rank B magic stone, after his summons have defeated yet another orc tribe. During that period, life for the Granvelles began to return to normal after the time they needed to overcome Mihai's departure, and the Knights of the Barony managed to clear the monsters that blocked the path to the mines. Although Alan's team carried out most of the difficult work, Granvelle had already sent personnel to occupy the mithril refineries, and extraction operations would likely resume fully during the summer. However, there was concern that Karnal might attack after losing control over the mines, so it was extremely important to remain vigilant in the face of the Viscount's strange silence. Next, Alan appears climbing a steep mountain alone. He remembers that Cecilia asked to go with him, but her father obviously knew that there is a limit to how much one should strengthen oneself on certain missions. When he reaches the top of the mountain, he spots a nest of armored ants that would certainly cause trouble for the miners who will arrive soon. From what Alan learned, a nest of these insects contains around 1,000 soldiers, in addition to a rank bee queen who lays eggs to produce more ants. To make matters worse, the only way to enter the anthill is through a frighteningly dark and narrow entrance, where the summoner could easily be surrounded by the enemies. Nevertheless, Alan is the type who enjoys a formidable challenge. Without complaining, he summons several bears, spiders, and a fish to strengthen his forces. As he expected, many ants emerge from the nest after sensing the threat, beginning a large-scale battle for control of the anthill's entrance. Days pass as the fighting continues. A month later, the summoner begins to realize that perhaps these ants will never end. He makes the trip to the anthill twice a week, eliminating around 200 ants per day, totaling 2,000, except for the fact that the bodies left behind disappear when he returns, preventing him from retrieving their magic stones. In other words, the queen is consuming the bodies and laying more eggs to replace the fallen soldiers. Another month passes, and after so much effort, Alan decides to change his strategy after defeating 5,000 of those insects. Unfortunately, he is not a full-time hunter and needs to work as a servant, which gives the enemies time to recover. At least that is what he thinks, because suddenly the ants stop emerging after all this time, rewarding the summoner's persistence in maintaining the offensive throughout the entire period. Without wasting time, he summons several hollows to search for the queen ant using their night vision. Through shared vision, Alan is able to map the entire labyrinth and draw the map in his book. Some owls are killed along the way, but he sends more and more to continue exploring the anthill, even discovering the place where the eggs are stored. Hours later, the exploration continues, and the sun is about to set. Alan should return home to avoid being scolded by his master, but he cannot allow the queen the opportunity to lay more eggs and rebuild her army. Speaking of her, after such a long search, his owls finally find the ruler of the anthill, and Alan runs toward her. The armored ant queen was terrifyingly large and looked dangerous, with several more soldiers protecting her from the front. However, it was nothing the intruder couldn't overcome with his vast number of teddies. Without wasting any time, the bears were sent charging at the ants and quickly managed to clear the way, completely isolating the queen. On the other hand, the creature proved she wouldn't be taken down easily, defeating several teddies at once. Even so, she couldn't eliminate more summons than Alan was able to conjure. It was only a matter of time before the bears gathered in such numbers that the queen could no longer handle them, bringing the fight to an end. Curiously, Alan needed far fewer bears than when he defeated the Orc King, but he assumed the Ant Queen must have been exhausted after giving birth to so many soldiers non-stop for 2 months. Either way, since it was already dark and he couldn't return home, the boy decided to camp inside the anthill. Then, suddenly, he discovered a vein of mithril. The next day, he arrived at the Baron's mansion carrying a piece of the armored Ant Queen's body as proof that he had truly cleared one of the anthills in White Dragon Mountain. Naturally, Granvelle and Zenov did not believe such a thing was possible, since not even the entire Order of Knights could defeat a nest of those monsters. Cecilia even teased the boy, saying he must have painted the ant carcass to make it look like a queen. In response, Alan showed the pieces of mithril he had found, which completely turned the situation in his favor and proved that he had indeed gone to the mountains. Granvelle immediately summoned the servant to give more details about his excursion, and Alan handed over the map he had drawn of the mine's location and its entire interior. Impressed by the discovery of a previously unseen mithril vein, his master granted him 30% of the extraction rights to that mine. Honestly, Alan did not understand what that meant. Sebas simply asked him to be patient, saying that in a few years he would understand the importance of what he had just achieved. Months later, in October, Alan had already turned 12. The mithril mines were being explored again after a century, although extraction from the vein he discovered would only begin next year. Working peacefully at his master's estate, the servant no longer had to worry about nearby monsters or money, since he had secured a share of the extraction profits. Even so, he felt he was not on the right path. His goal was to play on hell mode, not to settle into a comfortable and serene life. Therefore, he decided it was time to broaden his horizons. In the middle of this, Rickle complained that the royal messenger had returned for some reason. So Alan went to see what was happening. When receiving the messenger, Granvelle saw Viscount Carnal standing beside him in person. Upon learning that the mines had resumed operations, Carnal presented a proposal to Baron Granvelle. In the document, the king proposed to settle once and for all the issue of mine extraction between the two fiefs. For centuries, Granvelle and Carnal had taken turns exploiting the mithril. But now His Majesty suggested that the two cooperate in extracting the minerals together and divide the profits equally. Obviously, it was a very inconvenient agreement to propose only now that Carnal had lost access to the mines. Knowing this, Granvelle asked for time to visit the royal capital and learn more details in person. Furious, the messenger stood up from his chair and questioned whether his reputation was being doubted. However, Granvelle maintained his composure and simply replied that it was too serious a decision to be made hastily. All the visitors wanted was for the Baron to sign the document immediately. But since they failed to achieve their objective, the messenger left angrily alongside Carnal. Now that the unwanted visit was over, Granvelle raised his voice as he remembered the century of suffering and deprivation his people endured without access to mithril. Throughout all that time, Carnal had not lifted a finger to show even the slightest empathy, and now that he had lost the mines, he came forward with this talk of sharing profits. For that reason, Granvelle decided to wait for Xenoph to return from the mountains in 2 days before departing for the capital. Later, while washing dishes, Rickle and the cook discussed how this contract to share extraction might be advantageous, since no one knows when the White Dragon might return to Granvelle's side. However, after overhearing the conversation, Alan could not trust a single word from that Viscount. In his mind, signing those terms would certainly be a terrible idea. Suddenly, someone shouted Cecilia's name. Alan immediately ran to her room. Once there, her personal maid was dead, and 3 criminals had her under control. Without hesitation, Alan drew his sword and faced the enemy in front of him. However, his swordsmanship alone was not enough to overcome him, so the summoner switched the buffs in his stock of cards and returned to the fight with much greater strength. In the midst of this, Sebas warned Granvelle about the attack. During the fight, one of the accomplices threw a bomb that released smoke, causing Alan to faint and allowing the criminals to escape. Some time later, the summoner woke up tied up beside Cecilia. To better understand where he was and the situation they were in, he summoned a few chappies to look around. He soon discovered that the 3 kidnappers were right behind him. Inside the warehouse, a man, apparently the leader, appeared and was called Dagra. He questioned why there was a second child there, and one subordinate explained that the brat had shown great talent with a sword and should be worth a good amount as a slave. With that, the leader punched the servant in the stomach and reminded them that he was the one giving orders. Therefore, the boy should be killed if he caused any trouble. While the others asked if Marcus was all right, Alan realized that this man was far more dangerous than the other 3. Marcus grumbles that the boss put that aggressive lunatic in charge of the mission, and a colleague explains that Dagra is a professional warrior who has fought in a war and is the only one among them capable of facing Xenoph, although he is widely recognized as one of the most powerful warriors in the kingdom. Xenoph lost almost his entire squad after protecting the fortress for a full decade. Upon learning that there is practically a war going on, Alan laments that his mithril sword was left behind and, considering that he only has a dagger and a few iron balls in his inventory, fears he may not be able to protect Cecilia with just that. At that moment, one of the thugs steps out to relieve himself. When the door opens, Alan sends one of the birds outside, and the criminal questions what a bird is doing inside the ship, revealing a bit more about where the captives are being held. As he explores the vast exterior of the vessel through the shared vision, Alan discovers that he is aboard one of those giant magical flying ships. Looking around, he finds a restaurant where Carnal and the royal messenger are seated at one of the tables. Quickly, the summoner has Chappie listen in on the conversation between the two. The messenger says he pulled many strings to arrange things for the Viscount, who promises to grant him a good percentage of the mining rights once they regain control of the mines. The messenger worries that Granvelle might cause trouble in the capital, but Carnal assures him that will not happen, because if the Baron refuses once again to sign the contract, he will receive one of his daughter's hands as a bonus. Upon discovering that the wrongdoers kidnapped Cecilia to seize the mines by force, Alan summons Papillon to put the bandits to sleep. After the first one falls asleep, the second manages to defeat the butterfly, but the summoner has had enough time to free himself from his restraints, and he promises he will not let this go unpunished. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.